Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into a world where soot paints the walls, where footsteps echo on creaking boards, and where you wake long before the sun touches the skyline. You breathe in the cold dampness of a tiny Victorian room, and you already know you probably will not survive this in real life. Not without a few miracles or some very tough lungs. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and feel free to tell me your location and the time where you are right now. Now, dim the lights. You blink awake inside a narrow room that barely tolerates your presence. The ceiling leans inward, as if it wants a closer look at you. A thin beam of light squeezes through a cracked shutter and lands across the uneven floorboards where scraps of yesterday's dust still gather in clumps. You shift on the straw mattress that pokes your ribs like a persistent cat. Smells of old sweat, spilled ale, and something you decide not to identify too closely. Your blanket is thin enough to moonlight as a handkerchief. Every movement releases a faint draft that whispers around your ankles. The room is rented by the night, which was a common practice in many poorer neighbourhoods of Victorian London. That is your mainstream historical fact for this section. You share this space with 2 or 3 other sleepers who curl around each other in the shadows, breathing slowly. Their snores and soft murmurs create a rhythm that almost feels like ocean waves. If the ocean had a touch of mildew, you sit up carefully so you do not bump your head against the slanted wall. The room is so cramped that even your exhale feels rude. A mouse scurries across a broken tile near the chamber pot. It pauses, looks at you with mild irritation, then disappears under a board that lifts whenever the wind sighs. Some people insist Victorian slum mice behaved more like house pets. And although that is your quirky tidbit for today, is honestly not far from feeling true as you watch the little creature vanish. You stretch your arms and the air shifts with the scent of damp fabric. The walls are straw with old smoke fingerprints and faded patches where previous tenants tried to cover cracks with scraps of newspaper. You notice the headlines, they belong to different years, different scandals, different crimes. Nothing matches. It feels like the room absorbed a century's worth of small sorrows and is wearing them on its skin. A soft groan rises from the far corner, where an elderly man shifts under his coat, which serves as his blanket. He once told you he used to be a carpenter before the accident crushed his hand. His fingers never healed right. You have watched him stare at them sometimes as though they belonged to someone else, someone wealthier, someone luckier. It is a reminder that poverty can arrive in a single unlucky moment, and then it stays like an overstaying guest. You stand up, careful not to knock over the chipped mug you used as water cup. Your soles land on the floor and immediately sense the uneven plank, some warmly worn and some indifferent and cold. Outside your door, voices drift from the hallway. A child whimpers, someone is coughing again, and that deep rattling cough that slum doctors sometimes called a church bell cuzz. You could hear it long before the patient arrived. Historians still argue whether such symptoms were mostly caused by tuberculosis or made worse by chronic dampness soot and malnutrition. You step to the small basin in the corner. The water inside is not exactly fresh. The layer of dust floating on it forms a delicate film that you disturb with a fingertip. This is the water you saved from last night, because water comes from a shared pump that often runs dry in the early morning. You splash some on your face anyway. It is freezing enough to feel like a reprimand. A faint rumbling from the floor below makes the boards tremble under your toes. Probably early risers heading out or returning from a night shift. The stairwell holds all sounds hostage. A single footstep becomes a booming announcement that someone is on the move. You imagine the families below you, 5 or 6 people tucked into rooms meant for 2 muttering sleepy greetings while scrambling for their own limited morning routines. Your jacket hangs on a nail near the door, is worn to the point that it seems ashamed of itself. When you slip it on, the fabric crackles slightly. It traps a bit of leftover warmth from yesterday, just enough to make the morning feel bearable. You pat the pocket, making sure your few coins are still safe. They clink softly. That sound might as well be a lullaby in a place where money rarely lingers. A faint smell of fried, something wafts up from the street. Someone is already cooking scraps for breakfast. Maybe potatoes, maybe fish, Maybe something that used to be fish, but has lived a few extra lives as stoopy, a now questionable fritter. Your stomach tightens in response. Hunger does not wait politely for you to be fully awake. You linger near the window and ease it open. The hinge protests with a squeak that echoes down the alley. Outside, the world is painted in grey morning mist. Chimneys release early plumes of smoke that drift lazily upward. The sky is the colour of cold tin. Below a line of washing hangs between two buildings, barely moving. Half the shirts are missing buttons. A few socks have surrendered entirely. Nothing here is truly whole. Your breath joins the mist. It floats out and disappears into the tangle of roofs and chimneys. You can hear the distant clatter of delivery carts heading toward the market streets. The horses snort clouds into the air. Their hooves knock rhythmically on the cobblestones behind you. Someone shifts again in their sleep. You turn back, moving quietly, so you do not wake them. The mattress cacks under your weight as you bend to lace your boots. The lace is afraid. One snaps. You tie the stub into a knot that will hold only if the universe feels generous. The small door rattles slightly with each gust of wind. You rest your hand on it and take in the room once more. The peeling paint, the crooked floor, the chill that never fully leaves. Yet, there is something oddly peaceful about this moment. The world outside is noisy and unpredictable. But here in this narrow room, you know exactly what to expect. You take a deep breath, let it slow your pulse, and step toward the door. Your palm presses against the cool wood, the latch clicks softly. The day waits for you somewhere in the twisting alleys beyond, and although it may not be kind, it will be yours to navigate one careful step at a time. You ease the door open and slip into the dim hallway where the air always feels a little heavier than it should. The staircase groans beneath your weight, announcing each step, whether you like it or not. When you finally reach the bottom, landing the front door stands slightly ajar, letting in a thin band of chilly morning light. You nudge it open with your shoulder and step outside where the slum greets you with its maze of cramped alleys. The moment your boots touch the cobblestones, you sense how narrow the world becomes. The alley ahead curves sharply, a stone corridor pressed between leaning buildings that appear to whisper secrets to one another. Moisture clings to every surface. The walls glisten with early mist and last night's rain. A cat darts across your path, pauses long enough to judge you, then vanishes into a gap between two warped boards. You breathe in, and the scent of cold smoke mixes with the sour tang of refuge. A bakery somewhere nearby has already fired up its oven, and the faint smell of bread tries its best to elevate the morning. But it is easily outnumbered by the dampness and rot. Your path is cluttered with overturned buckets, discarded rags, and puddles whose origins you decide not to question too deeply. You move carefully because the alleys twist like tangled yarn. Many visitors once claimed the poorest districts were built by accident rather than intention. That is your mainstream historical fact for this section. Urban planning barely touched these neighbourhoods, leaving residents to live in spaces that grew haphazardly with every new family that arrived. Some buildings are so close together that neighbours can shake hands through opposing windows without even stretching. As you turn a corner, someone shouts from an upper floor. A woman leans out and dumps a bucket of murky water into the street. It splashes near your boots, and you step aside just in time. She mutters a rushed apology, though you suspect she has done this every day for years, and does not expect anyone to be underneath. Rumour has it that some tenants would whistle before emptying buckets to signal anyone below. Whether this habit was real or simply a courtesy invented in later stories remains your quirky tidbit. Children weave through the alley like fish in shallow water. They chase one another around crates and leap over puddles with startling skill. A few of them are barefoot, and you wonder how they tolerate the cold, sharp stones beneath their feet. One child pauses to examine you, head tilted as though trying to decide if you belong here, or if you somehow got lost. But before you can offer a nod, he grins and darts away again, swallowed by the alley's next turn. A man with a cart squeezes through the narrow space behind you, grumbling as he pushes the wooden wheels over uneven ground. The cart wobbles dangerously close to a stack of crates, and he curses under his breath when one nearly topples. You step aside to let him pass. His shoulders hunch forward, his coat patched in so many places, it looks like a quilt. Work today is going to be long for him. You can tell from his weary expression somewhere above a window slams shut. Another opens with a squeak. Voices float down from every angle. People call to each other about chores, errands and complaints. Life is packed so tightly here that privacy becomes a luxury you rarely encounter. Even now, you can hear a conversation happening inside a room behind a cracked shutter. A couple is arguing about money. The sound rises and falls like a tide. You look away, but the words stick to you anyway. As you walk deeper into the alley system, the path narrows again. Two buildings lean together so closely that their roof edges nearly touch. Some scholars still debate whether these upper levels naturally sagged over time, or were deliberately built to expand living space outward when families grew. Either way, you walk through what feels like a stone and timber canyon where the sky becomes a thin strip of light far above you. You pass a doorway where an old man sits on a stool. His face is a map of creases, each one marking a different hardship or season. He tips his hat in your direction. You return the gesture, and he smiles faintly, the kind of smile that holds a whole lifetime of stories, but only shares a fraction of one. He is sharpening a small blade on a wet stone, scraping it back and forth with slow practice strokes. You suspect he repairs tools for a living, or maybe shapes metal scraps into something useful. Up close, you notice a tiny emblem burned into a stool, a carved pigeon. It probably means nothing, but it lingers in your mind. Ahead of you, the alley widens enough for a ray of sunlight to reach the cobbles. It glints off a broken bottle half embedded in the dirt. You skirt around it, listening to the soft hum of voices merging from every direction. People move with purpose through these narrow passages. They know every shortcut, every hazard, every place where the ground dips just enough to collect rainwater. They walk with heads slightly bowed, adapting themselves to the tightness of the environment. A group of women stands outside a cramped doorway talking in low voices. Two hold laundry baskets, the linens hanging heavy with moisture. Another woman cradles a baby whose cheeks are flushed from the cold. She hums something gentle. Maybe a lullaby, maybe something else entirely. When her eyes meet yours, she gives you a polite nod before returning to her conversation. Her voice blends with the others into a comforting murmur. A sudden noise snaps your attention to the side. A cluster of boys huddle around a crate, watching something intently. You lean slightly to see. They have discovered a beetle the size of a coin, and are cheering it on as it tries to climb a small rock. One boy insists beetles bring luck if you see them before noon. Historians still debate whether such superstitions reflected genuine belief or served merely as imaginative escapes during harsh days. You move on. The deeper you go, the more the alley feels like a living organism with its own breath, its own heartbeat. The walls seem to pulse with footsteps and whispered conversations. The ground carries the vibrations of carts and hurried strides. Even the air itself seems to inhale and exhale with the movement of people. A gentle drizzle begins to fall, adding a soft percussion to your journey. It taps against window ledges, trickles down brick faces, and wraps the alley in a glistening sheen. You lift your collar against the chill and continue forward, letting the narrow corridors guide you toward whatever the morning has planned. You follow the winding path of the alley until the stones begin to slope slightly downward. The air thickens with moisture, and something you recognize instantly as the early morning hunt for water. You tug your jacket tighter and move toward the communal pump that the neighborhood relies on. It stands crookedly in a small open yard surrounded by leaning walls, and even from a distance you can already hear the creak of the handle and the low chatter of people waiting their turn. The pump is painted a tired shade of green, though most of the paint has peeled away, leaving a mottled surface patched with rust. A shallow trough at its base is filled with stale water and the occasional floating leaf. You reach the yard and step into the loose semicircle of neighbours gathering there. Some carrying pails, others holding dented tin mugs or chipped pottery jugs. Everyone keeps their place, though the line is more of an unspoken agreement than an organised queue. A woman in front of you pulls the pump handle with steady determination. A thin stream of murky water sputters out weak at first, then slightly stronger. She fills her bucket, partially frowns at the colour, then shrugs as if to say, "This is what today offers." That is your mainstream historical fact. Clean water was notoriously scarce in many Victorian slums, and residents often shared a single pump that did not always provide water fit for drinking. Contamination was common. Complaints were common too. Solutions, however, were not. A man behind you clears his throat and adjusts his cap. His boots are caked with mud from a job you suspect involved carrying heavy loads through yesterday's rain. He glances at the trickling pump and mutters that last summer it produced water, so warm you could almost brew tea with it. Whether that is an exaggeration or a proud memory of slum folklore becomes your quirky tidbit for this section. You watch the pump handle rise and fall. The metal screeches each time it reaches the top of its arc. The noise rings through your bones, but somehow it also lulls you. The repetition becomes part of the morning rhythm. A baby cries somewhere behind you, startled by the sound. The mother gently rocks the infant, murmuring something soothing. You notice her bucket has a crack patched with tar, a repair that has clearly been tested many times. Your turn approaches. The group shifts as the previous person steps aside, and you take hold of the cold handle. It bites your palm slightly. You start to pump. The first few strokes produce nothing except a deep gurgling somewhere inside the mechanism. Then water dribbles out cloudy and unenthusiastic. You sigh and keep pumping gradually. The stream strengthens. It is not clear by any stretch of the imagination, but at least it flows. You fill your mug halfway and examine the surface. A faint shimmer of grime floats across it. You debate whether to drink or wait for a better day. A young boy beside you, holding a jug nearly as tall as himself, leans close and whispers that if you squint, it looks almost like broth. You give him a tired smile. His remark somehow makes the moment feel lighter. The yard around you awakens more with each passing minute. A woman pours water into a cooking pot while another scrubs a shirt against a stone, the fabric slapping wetly with each stroke. A thin layer of steam rises from someone's kettle on a small outdoor stove. The smoke swirls up into the air, merging with the grey morning sky. You notice how water directs nearly every household's schedule. Those who arrive late face a weaker stream, or must wait until someone from the city eventually repairs the pump. Some scholars still disagree about how often these pumps were maintained, and whether certain districts were neglected intentionally or simply overwhelmed by demand. The debate lingers in the back of your mind as you continue to pump, feeling the resistance in the handle grow heavier. You finally fill your small container. It is not enough for the entire day, but it will do for now. You step aside, nodding to the next person. The man with the tar patch bucket immediately takes your place. His movements impatient yet precise. He pumps with the speed of someone who has spent years perfecting the angle of each pull. A stray dog wanders into the yard and investigates the trough by the pump. It sniffs the surface, hesitates, then decides even desperation has standards. It trots over to you instead, tail wagging hopefully. You tilt your mug just slightly and let a few drops spill near its paws. The dog laps them up with eagerness, its ears twitching in gratitude. The drizzle from earlier begins again, soft at first, then more insistent. It patters gently across the yard, collecting on the pump handle and turning the dirt underfoot into slippery mud. You tuck your mug inside your jacket to protect it from the rain. Around you, people start shifting their weight, adjusting their sleeves, pulling hoods or scarves over their heads. Rain here is simply a condition of life, not an inconvenience. You listen to the rhythm of the pump continuing behind you, the squeak, the splash, the chatter. It blends into the rest of the slum soundscape. A child laughing, someone arguing down the passageway, a cart rattling over cobblestones. It is all part of the constant tapestry of noise that wraps itself around the district. As you turn to leave the yard, you glance once more at the pump. You imagine it will still be here tomorrow morning, leaning the same way, creaking in the same tone, offering water that is just useful enough to keep everyone standing. You step into the alley again, your mug warm against your side, and let the path guide you onward into the day. You step back into the alley with your small supply of water, and your stomach gives a low, hollow ache. Morning hunger has a talent for arriving before you are ready for it. You follow the scent of frying scraps drifting through the damp air, hoping to find a bit of breakfast that will not empty your pocket entirely. The slum is already busy with vendors who set up before dawn, each one jostling for space along the tight corridors. The first food seller you see is an older woman perched on a wooden crate. She has a pan balanced over a tiny coal brazier, its wavering flame barely strong enough to heat the oil. The pan crackles with what might be sliced potatoes or perhaps turnip disguised as potato. That is one modest truth. People often forget about the Victorian poor. Many meals relied on whatever could mimic something tastier or more filling. This counts as your widely accepted historical detail for the section. Fake flavours were survival tools, not tricks. You watch as she flips a piece with an iron fork. The edges are crisping nicely, though the smell carries a faint bitterness that suggests the oil has seen too many mornings. You step closer and exchange a nod with her. She recognises your look instantly. Hunger is a language with no need for translation. You ask for a portion, and she quotes a price that makes your coins WSE inside your pocket. Still, you hand them over because you know better than to argue when food is scarce and morning energy is precious. She wraps your serving in a bit of newspaper. The ink bleeds slightly from the heat, but you take it gratefully as you bite into the first piece. You savour the warmth, even though the taste is uneven. A boy nearby watches with wide eyes, licking his lips. His own breakfast appears to be a crust of bread, so dry it seems allergic to moisture. You break off a small piece of yours and offer it to him. He hesitates, then takes it with a shy grin, and quickly disappears into the crowd of early risers. You continue walking, nibbling as you go. The alley opens into a broader lane where more vendors gather. A woman sells steaming tea that tastes as though the leaves were used 3 times already. A man beside her offers a GRL so thin you suspect the pot spends most of its life empty. One seller boasts loudly that his sausages contain real meat. You raise an eyebrow at that. Real meat is a rare treasure here, so boldly advertising it feels more like theatre than truth. A little farther along, a makeshift stall sells fried eels on skewers. The scent is sharp and unmistakable. Some slum residents had a deep fondness for eel because it was cheap and easy to catch in polluted rivers. Whether the taste was loved or merely tolerated is still a point of gentle dispute among culinary historians, giving you the academic disagreement for this section without echoing earlier phrasing. You pass a vendor carrying a bucket filled with something pale and gelatinous. He calls it jellied calf's foot, a cheap protein that many families relied on. He brags that it cures nearly everything from a tired back to a broken heart. You doubt the accuracy of either claim, but it certainly provides a quirky sliver of slum culture. People here could turn even the most unlikely scraps into treasured remedies. The morning noise grows as you reach a cluster of food sellers. Pots bang, steam whistles through bent lids. Vendors bark out their prices with the urgency of people who know every coin matters. The narrow lane becomes a living river of bodies pushing forward. Elbows brushing baskets, bumping, voices overlapping. You weave carefully, so you do not spill the last bites of your breakfast. As you finish your portion, a man with a weathered face approaches. He sells day-old pastries, salvaged from wealthier district items too stale for the rich, but still prized here inside his basket, are buns that lean to one side like tired sailors. You smile at his persistence. He tells you that one of his buns once contained an actual raisin that had not been chewed by mice first. You are not sure if he is joking. You wander toward a quieter section of the lane, licking grease from your fingertips ahead. You see a group of women preparing food not to sell, but to carry into their homes. One washes wilted greens in a bucket. Another trims mould off a loaf as neatly as a tailor cutting cloth. A third kneads dough with a determination that suggests she is not simply making bread, but wrestling the day into submission. He paused to observe their careful work. They lift, mix and chop with a practiced efficiency born from necessity. Their kitchen tools are minimal. A single pot might handle soup, stews, boiling water for tea, and even laundry in the same week. Firewood is precious, so meals are cooked quickly or not at all. Everything about these scenes feels both fragile and resilient at once. A young girl nearby is selling apples with more optimism than the apples deserve. Most are bruised, one is actively collapsing, and one has clearly been pecked by a bird. Still, she insists they are fresh. When you raise a skeptical brow, she assures you they were picked last week, which counts as fresh enough in this neighbourhood. Her earnestness makes you smile. You buy one that appears the least defeated by life, and she beams proudly as though she has sold a perfect specimen. Nearby, a baker's apprentice runs down the lane carrying a tray of steaming rolls meant for a tavern. The aroma floods the air with a buttery warmth that instantly lifts everyone's spirits. The apprentice shouts for people to move aside his feet, slapping the stones as he tries to keep the rolls from falling. A dog chases after him, barking excitedly, hoping for a drop treat. You continue down the lane, letting your steps carry you through the swirling mix of scents and voices. Breakfast in the slums is not a peaceful affair. It is a negotiation between hunger cost and fortune. Some days you are lucky, and the food tastes better than it looks. Other days you settle for anything warm enough to trick your stomach into contentment. Today falls somewhere in the middle. You wipe your hands on your coat and let out a slow breath. The warmth of the food lingers just long enough for your body to register it. Then the chill returns, nibbling at your fingertips again, but at least you feel steadier now. Ready to face the next part of the morning, you turn your head to the street ahead, where the crowds thin and the path gradually leads toward the working districts. Breakfast may be behind you, but the day is only beginning, and the slums always have another story waiting just around the bend. You leave the breakfast lane behind and step toward the broader road that leads people toward their day's labour. The sky is still a pale, undecided grey, and the dampness in the air clings to your coat as if trying to keep you home. You adjust your collar and hail slowly and start walking toward the places where work might be found if luck decides to show up today. The road gradually widens enough for 2 carts to pass, though the drivers never seem convinced of that. Horses snort metal rims scrape against the stones, and the whole street feels like a restless creature waking up. People with lunch tins tucked under their arms hurry along with the same mixture of determination and dread that accompanies uncertain employment. You join the flow, letting the crowd pull you forward. You pass a cluster of men gathered near a brick wall, each one leaning on a cane or stooping slightly, as though last night's fatigue is still gripping their shoulders. They're waiting for a foreman to arrive and choose a handful of workers for the day. This type of pickup labour was extremely common in the Victorian period, a fact most social historians consider well demented. It makes the scene painfully predictable. Each man hopes for his name to be called, yet most will return home without a single coin. A tall man with a moustache, the size of a broom, glances at you and taps the wall with his boot. He claims the foreman likes to arrive late just to watch everyone squirm. You cannot tell if this is true or simply a piece of local law people cling to in order to make sense of unfairness. Either way, it adds a flicker of humour to an otherwise grim weight, offering you your odd fragment of cultural colour for this section. You continue walking, hoping for better prospects elsewhere. A young woman hurries past, carrying a bundle of fabric, headed toward a workshop where she probably stitches hems until her fingers go numb. Another person hobbles along with a tool bag slung over one shoulder, squinting at the sky as if trying to guess whether rain will ruin their day or not. The variety of jobs here is wide, but the security of them is thin. Every step forward feels like a gamble. As you round a corner, you catch sight of the distant chimneys belonging to the factories. Their smoke curls upward in steady streams that mimic a slow, dragging breath. For a moment you watch the plumes drift, thinking about how these factories power a city that rarely wonders about the hands that feed them. Some modern scholars cannot quite agree whether the surge in factory jobs truly improves survival for the slum poor, or simply change the shape of hardship. You do not need their debate to understand how complicated the truth feels. All you need is a glance at the people trudging ahead of you with weary eyes. You pass a ragged poster peeling off a wall. It advertises openings at a nearby dockyard, though the state looks faded, and you suspect the positions filled long ago. Still, Its presence draws hopeful looks from people walking by. You can almost hear their internal questions. Should they check anyway? Should they spend the fare to get there? Should they risk missing another chance somewhere else? Work is a constant puzzle here, and the pieces rarely... A man standing at the corner calls out that he knows of odd jobs available if you can pay him for the information. You shake your head. Anyone charging for leads in a neighbourhood? This poor is unlikely to offer anything genuine. He shrugs and turns to entice the next passer by with the same pitch. Closer to the factories, the crowd thickens. You hear the clank of metal gates opening, and the first wave of workers rushing into long brick buildings with tall windows. Some hurry to avoid fines for tardiness. Others walk slowly, conserving energy for the grueling hours that await them. A pair of friends whisper to each other, exchanging predictions about how many accidents will happen today. Their casual tone surprises you until you remember how common injuries are in these places. A horse-drawn wagon rumbles by carrying sacks of coal. Dust shakes free with every bump sprinkling the road like black snow. You cough and pull your sleeve over your mouth. The dust settles on your coat, on the hair of the woman beside you, even on the food stall farther up the road. Nobody bothers brushing it away. Coal dust is so common here that people treat it like another layer of weather. You slow your pace near a cluster of brick buildings where mill workers often gather. A boy standing there no more than 12 carries a metal lunch tin, almost as big as his head. He tells you proudly that he works better than grown men because he is small enough to crawl under machines when something jams. The pride worries you more than the job does. You nod anyway because children in the slums grow up inside realities that do not wait for permission. You continue moving with the crowd, knowing that work today might come from anywhere. Maybe a factory gate will open suddenly. Maybe a dock supervisor will call for extra hands. Maybe a carpenter will need someone to hold tools. You keep your eyes open for every possibility, scanning the street, as though opportunity itself could appear disguised as a passing stranger. Ahead, a tall brick warehouse has men gathering around the front entrance. The door is still closed, but a posted sign reads that additional workers may be needed for unloading shipments. You join the loosely formed line. People stand quietly shifting their weight from one foot to the other. A few talk about last week's job that ended abruptly when the supervisor vanished without paying. Stories like that circulate often enough to become warnings whispered from one slum to another. As you wait, you listen to the murmur around you. One man describes his previous job repairing carriages until a horse spooked and knocked him into a wall. Another tells a strange story about someone in the neighbourhood who insists he can predict which factories will hire based on the smell of their smoke. You cannot decide whether he is joking, but his remark earns a few tired laughs, lifting the morning mood, even briefly. A creak from inside the warehouse makes everyone stiffen. Then a latch turns, the door swings open. A bearded foreman steps out, eyes scanning the line with a practiced look that measures bodies like tools. He shouts that they only need 6 workers. You feel the tension coil around the group as people straighten up, trying to look stronger or faster or more capable than they feel. He starts pointing. 1, then 2, then 3. Your heartbeat quickens. 4, then 5. Once the foreman hesitates, then picks a man standing 2 places ahead of you. Relief mixes with disappointment in your chest. The chosen workers hurry inside while the rest of the crowd deflates quietly. You step back from the line, brushing cold dust from your sleeve. The day moves on, indifferent to who found work and who did not. You decide not to stop. One missed chance does not end a day. You set your shoulders, inhale a smoky morning air, and continue down the road, hoping the next turn might lead to something that keeps hunger at bay for one more night. You follow the stream of bodies drifting toward the workshop quarter, drawn by the steady chorus of clattering tools and muffled voices that spill onto the street. The air changes as you approach. It grows warmer, heavier, and tinged with the metallic scent of heated iron. You wipe your forehead even before stepping inside, because you know what awaits beyond the warped doorway of the nearest building. You push the door open and enter a workshop that feels far too small for the number of people crammed into it. Heat rolls toward you in a thick wave. Each breath tastes of dust and sweat. Workers hunch over benches, stools, crates. Anything that can serve as a surface, all positioned in dizzying rows. The room flickers with lantern light and faint daylight leaking through windows clouded by grime. The first sound you notice is the constant clink of tiny hammers against metal. It rings like 100 impatient bells, each one fighting for attention. This type of crowded, sweltering workspace was common in many industrial trades of the Victorian era, a reality well documented in both government reports and the workers' own accounts. That is your anchored historical point for this section. You feel it in your bones the moment you step inside. A man with a soot-darkened face nods to you, wiping his brow with an oil-stained rag. He gestures to an empty spot at a long bench, though calling it empty is generous. It is a narrow sliver of wood squeezed between two workers who barely have room to lift their arms. You slide in carefully, trying not to disturb their rhythm. One is shaping wire into small hooks. The other assembles tiny clasps with movement so quick they blur. Someone hands you a tool you vaguely recognize. It is warm from use, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless palms. You try to find a comfortable grip as you settle into the rhythm of the room. Overhead, a pulley system cacks each time a worker shifts position. The heat seems trapped here, unable to escape through the low sagging ceiling. You study the room more closely as you work. Shelves along the walls are stacked with parts and scraps. Piles of metal shavings glitter faintly in corners. A faint haze floats above the workers, rising toward the lanterns. Your shirt sticks to your back almost instantly. The smell of smoke and damp wool mixes into something you wish you did not have to breathe, but everyone else seems immune to it. Next to you, a young apprentice. No older than 15, wipes his hands on his trousers. He tells you the workshop owner once tried to raise wages by half a penny, but the inspector accused him of encouraging laziness and forced him to reverse the change. Whether the story is true or just a bit of shop floor or folklore, it slides neatly into your category of odd slum trivia for the day. You smile at the boy's earnest expression. A shout erupts from the far corner. A worker has dropped a tool that narrowly missed his foot. He curses loudly as he retrieves it. His neighbour grumbles about losing concentration. Arguments like these flicker constantly in hot rooms where tempers heat as quickly as metal, yet they pass almost as quickly. The moment the tool is back in hand, the worker resumes his task without another word. You peek toward the workshop door where a thin draft sneaks in from the hall. The cool air barely reaches you before dissolving in the factory heat. A girl near the doorway adjusts a stack of boxes, wiping droplets from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Someone teases her about working too fast, and she responds with a mock scowl that lasts only a moment. While your hands move, your ears absorb every layer of sound. The hammer taps form the heartbeat of the room, scraping metal acts like breath. Occasional quiet murmurs between workers add the rhythm of conversation. It is oddly hypnotic, and for a brief moment you let yourself drift into the warm pull of focus, yet you snap back when you hear a cracking sound above you. A damaged beam cacks ominously. Several workers glance up. One mutters that the building has survived worse storms. Another whispers that it might collapse someday, though nobody has time or money to fix it. Architectural historians have long debated whether these collapsing structures resulted from poor construction or neglect from landlords who saw no reason to invest in repairs. You do not need scholars to tell you the danger is real and hangs over you like another layer of heat. A supervisor finally appears, a stout man with an apron tied tightly across his chest. His voice cuts through the noise as he orders increased output because deadlines loom. He strides between the rows, pointing at specific workers, telling them to hurry, shouting reminders that mistakes cost money. Nobody looks up directly at him. They simply adjust their pace and continue. You feel the sweat trickle down your spine as you try to keep up. Your fingers ache, but the person beside you works even faster, and pride nudges you forward. The repetitive motion becomes a rhythm that holds you steady. Tap, adjust, tighten, repeat. Your shoulders burn, your wrists protest. Still, you keep going. Lunch is not for several hours, but already you hear your stomach grumble. A man working behind you jokes that hunger sharpens the mind. You laugh softly, though you suspect hunger sharpens very little. Except irritability, he winks in your direction. then resumes his work with renewed ferocity. A girl a few rows away drops a finished piece into a wooden box. It clatters loudly, startling a nearby worker who almost knocks over a lantern. He steadies it with shaking hands while muttering something under his breath. Everyone glances nervously at the open flame. Fire is a constant threat. A single spark could turn the entire workshop into a furnace. People here rarely speak about the risk, but you can feel the unspoken fear beneath their daily routines. The supervisor barks again. A boy scurries to retrieve a bundle of materials from the storeroom. You catch a glimpse through the open door. It is filled to bursting with crates, tools, and bundles wrapped in cloth. Dust motes drift in the beam of light coming from the single window. The boy disappears into the clutter and returns moments later with the bundle balanced precariously on his hip. With every passing minute, the heat feels more alive, as if it is crawling up your arms and settling against your neck. You resist the urge to wipe your face again. Everyone else seems to ignore the discomfort, moving steadily forward, pushing through the rising temperature. There is a quiet strength here, born not of luxury, but of survival. When a moment of relative calm settled over the room, you pause long enough to stretch your fingers. They crack softly, a reminder that your body is not used to such repetitive strain. The apprentice next to you whispers that you should roll your wrists now and then to avoid stiffening. You thank him, grateful for the tip. Small kindnesses like this act as a counterweight to the constant pressure. The supervisor eventually steps outside to check on shipment schedules. The room releases a collective, nearly imperceptible sigh. You realize then how tightly everyone holds themselves whenever he is near. It is not fear exactly. It is the awareness that one wrong move could cost them the day's wage. As the noise swells again, you return to your task with steady hands. The workshop might feel like a furnace, but it also hums with determination. Everyone here works not because they want to, but because the slums offer few alternatives. You let that truth settle in your mind as the heat nudges you deeper into the rhythm. By the time your first hour passes, you feel as though the room has folded you into its daily cadence. Sweat slicks your temples, your muscles complain, yet you keep going because stopping does not exist inside these walls. Outside the city continues its restless motion, but in here, time is measured by the sound of tools striking metal, by the weight of the air, and by the knowledge that the shift will stretch far longer than your energy ever will. You leave the workshop when the heat becomes too much to bear, stepping back into the cooler air of the alley. Your shirt sticks to your back. Your fingers tremble from the strain of repetitive work, and the taste of metal still clings to your tongue. As you pause to breathe, a thin wisp of smoke drifts overhead, and you follow its trail toward an area where the buildings are lower and the doorway smaller. This is where the youngest labourers spend their days, tucked into spaces no adult could comfortably enter. You approach a narrow lane lined with low brick structures. The windows are so smeared with soot that you cannot see inside, but you hear the faint scraping of brushes, the shuffle of bare feet, and the rhythmic coughs of children trying to work through the dust. You step closer, guided by the hushed sounds. When you push open a wooden door to one of the buildings, the warm, dusty air envelops you immediately inside. The light is faint and amber-coloured, filtered through grime that has not been wiped away in years. Children hunch over piles of cloth paper and debris, some sort scrap metal. Others twist wires or sweep chimneys tools to prepare for the next climb. Many Victorian children worked long hours in hazardous trades like these, something historians have thoroughly documented through factory reports and charity records that serves as your grounded historical reference for this section, and you feel the truth of it settle uncomfortably in your chest. A little girl sitting near the wall looks up at you with wide dark eyes. She cannot be more than 6 or 7. Her hands move quickly, sorting tiny items into piles. Her fingers are blackened at the tips, and she has a smudge of soot across her cheek, like a shadow she cannot escape. When she blinks, dust falls from her lashes. She offers you a small smile anyway, a gesture that feels far too gentle for a room this harsh. A boy nearby climbs into a narrow wooden frame, using it to practice navigating tight spaces. He moves with startling ease, tucking his arms in and wriggling like a cat slipping through a fence. One of the older children tells you proudly that the boy is training to be a chimney sweep's assistant because he is small enough to fit through flue, others cannot. He adds that some sweeps used to rub themselves with pitch or grease to help them slide better. Whether anyone truly believed that helped or whether it was simply a desperate myth passed among the children, no one can say for sure. It becomes your strange little curiosity for this part of the story. The room vibrates slightly when someone upstairs drags a heavy bucket across the floorboards. Dust showers down like grey snow. Some of the children cover their hair. Others ignore it and keep working. You find yourself instinctively brushing your coat, even though the effort makes little difference. Everything here seems coated in a thin layer of past labour. You step farther inside, trying not to disturb the buckets, boxes, and heaps of material scattered everywhere. One corner of the room holds chimney brushes of various sizes. Their bristles look soft at a distance, but reveal harsh metal threads up close. Several children shake them out, releasing soot clouds that drift lazily before settling again. You cough lightly into your sleeve. Voices murmur around you. A pair of older girls sit shoulder at a workbench sewing scraps into rough cloth bags. One of them explains that the room is warmer today than usual. She says cold mornings make their fingers freeze, which slows everything down. The other girl hums a soft tune, perhaps something she heard from her mother, or maybe from a street singer. The melody is soft, haunting, and oddly comforting. A sudden squeal distracts you. A boy leaps back from a crate as a rat darts out from beneath a pile of cloth. Rats in the slums are not shy creatures. They roam freely as if paying rent. The children chase it away with sticks, laughing as though it were part of their routine. One child claims the rat is a good luck charm, because it only appears on days when the foreman is in a good mood. You cannot tell if he is joking, or if this genuinely feels like reliable weather prediction of workplace cruelty. You crouch beside a girl who is picking broken glass from discarded bottles. Her hands move quickly, but you see tiny cuts forming along her fingers. She says it barely hurts anymore. The idea chills you more than the damp air creeping through the doorway behind you. She pulses to blow dust from her palm, sending a shimmering cloud upward. The manager appears suddenly stepping in through a side door. He is wiping his hands with a rag and squints at the children like a shepherd checking on his flock. He instructs one pair to speed up and praises another for their precision. You watch his movements closely. His tone is not unkind, but it is detached. He sees efficiency before he sees childhood around you. The children resume their tasks with practiced calm. Some chew on dry bread to keep hunger from distracting them. Others shift positions to relieve stiff backs. You sense the camaraderie that forms in places like this. They share scraps of stories, jokes, and whispered hopes. A few dream of jobs that involve fresh air. One boy declares with complete confidence that he will someday own a horse. The fact that he says it with such certainty sends a small warmth through your chest. As you observe, you notice something else. The walls hold tiny handprints made of soot. They climb upward in uneven trails, evidence of small hands using the walls for balance. As they move about, these traces feel like both artwork and warning, a reminder of the lives shaped by these spaces. A faint shiver runs through the building as a cart passes outside. A rush of cold morning air creeps through the cracks in the door. The children all pause at the same moment, savouring the chill like a gift. Then they return to their tasks one breath at a time. You overhear two adults discussing a recent tragedy involving a sweep who became stuck in a narrow flue. They speak in hushed tones, glancing at the younger children to make sure they do not hear too much. What actually caused accidents like that remains uncertain even today. Some researchers think it was inexperience. Others blame faulty chimneys or negligent masters. There is no single conclusion here. Inside this cramped room, the uncertainty feels heavy. You step back toward the doorway, your eyes adjusting to the dim light. Before you leave, the little girl who smiled earlier gives a tiny wave. You return it, trying not to let your face reveal the knot forming in your chest. Childhood here moves at a speed that feels wildly unfair. You feel that truth as you step outside and let the cooler air surround you again. A thin plume of soot escapes from the chimney above the workshop. It blends into the morning sky with a slow, spiraling motion. You watch until the soot disappears, then turn away as the sound of children's coughing lingers in your mind, longer than the drifting smoke. You follow the alley back toward the main street. And as you walk, the rhythm of the slums changes. The clang of metal and the sharp coughs of child labour fade behind you, replaced by softer, steadier sounds. You hear buckets sliding across floors, babies fussing kettles rattling on thin iron stoves. This part of the neighbourhood belongs mostly to women, the quiet backbone of the daily grind, weaving survival out of scraps, chores and impossible expectations. You move toward a row of narrow dwellings where laundry lines crisscross overhead like sagging banners. Shirts, skirts, aprons and cloths ripple faintly in the breeze, though many carry more holes than fabric. A woman stands beneath the lines, wringing out a blanket with the strength of someone who has done this 1,000 mornings. Her forearms glisten with cold water. She barely glances at the chill as she twists the heavy cloth again. Inside the doorway next to her, another woman kneels beside a small tub, scrubbing her husband's trousers against a washboard. She hums a tune that steadies her rhythm, though the melody sounds worn from repetition. She tells you without prompting that most of the water she uses has already cleaned something twice today. In Victorian slums, water for laundry was often reused multiple times out of necessity, a widely recognised reality that appears again and again in the accounts of social reformers. That sets your base historical detail for this section. You step inside the dim room where she works. The damp warmth feels almost comforting compared to the cold outside. The floorboards creak beneath your feet, and the small fireplace spits weak sparks. Her daughter sits nearby, patching fabric with small, careful stitches. She bites the thread after each knot and pulls it tight with a stern little frown, as though she is stitching her way toward a better future. The room smells of soap mildew and simmering broth. Her cradle in the corner rocks gently as a baby fusses. The mother shifts her weight, pushing the cradle with her foot while scrubbing. You notice the remarkable coordination, the way she balances 3 tasks at once without losing pace. There is a quiet heroism in this, the daily choreography of survival. Outside, in the shared yard, a woman is plucking a chicken with brisk, practiced motions. Feather fluff drifts through the air like strange snow. She explains that the bird was bought cheaply because it was nearly too old to lay eggs. She plans to stretch the meat across 3 meals with broth dumplings and leftovers. Then she laughs softly and adds that the last time she bought a hen like this, it turned out to be a rooster that refused to crow and refused to die. Whether that story is true or simply a neighbourhood joke, it fits neatly into the category of odd domestic anecdotes you have been gathering. A louder sound catches your attention. A group of women gather near a doorway talking about a husband who has not returned from his shift. Their voices rise and fall in waves. One insists he is drinking somewhere. Another suggests he injured himself. A third shakes her head and blames the foreman. She claims foremen enjoy sending men home early just to remind them who holds the power. A few researchers who study slum dynamics have gone back and forth about whether such foremen deliberately manipulated hours or whether shortages of work forced unpredictable schedules. The uncertainty lingers like a stubborn fog, adding your academic tension for this section. You move farther along the row of dwellings. In one doorway, a widow sits repairing boots. Her fingers move quickly, weaving new soles into old leather. She nods when you greet her. Her hair is tied back with a strip of torn fabric. She tells you softly that she repairs shoes for 3 families and cooks meals for 2 others. The coins she earns are small, but they add up enough to keep a roof overhead. She gestures to her young son, sweeping the floor. He tries to look stern and responsible, though the broom handle is nearly twice his height. Inside another home, you see 3 women bent over baskets of rags. They pick out pieces long enough to be resin-neon into usable cloth. One woman jokes that if she ever becomes rich, she will buy an entire bolt of fabric and roll around on it like a queen. The others laugh, though all 3 keep working while they do. Their hands never rest, as if stopping would somehow make the day collapse. The next room you enter is filled with the comforting smells of cooking. A woman stirs a pot of stew with practiced patience. She offers you a warm, tired smile. You see roots and scraps bobbing in the broth. She tells you her husband and sons are out looking for work, and the stew stretch far enough for whoever returns. She uses herbs from a small pot near the window, proud that she keeps them alive despite the lack of sunlight. Many families kept herb pots exactly like this small windowsill gardens that offered tiny luxuries in otherwise cramped homes. You watch as she ladles stew into a bowl for her youngest child, who wobbles around the room with more enthusiasm than balance. The child giggles as he spills a drop on his own foot. Then he proudly presents the bowl to you as though offering a royal gift. You decline gently, knowing every drop matters in this home. His mother chuckles and wipes his cheek with her apron. Outside, a woman beats a rug against a wooden post. Dust erupts in powerful clouds. She pauses to catch her breath and confesses that she hates this chore more than any other, but it must be done, or the fleas will take over. You believe her instantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrive in these cramped environments. She claps the rug again, sending another grey cloud swirling into the air. A few steps farther, two neighbours argue over who misplaced the shared kettle. Heated debates like this simmer constantly, though they rarely last long. The women snap at each other for a few moments, exchange sharp words, then abruptly switch to talking about a good price on carrots. A vendor had yesterday. Their ability to return quickly to calm conversation feels like a skill honed through necessity, not choice. You pass a doorway where a grandmother tells a young girl a story while brushing her hair. Her voice is low, soft, almost musical. The tale is about a woman who found a coin in the street and spent it on a loaf of bread blessed by a wandering preacher who promised it would never grow stale. Whether this is a folk tale or simply an invention to entertain the child, the warmth of the moment touches you. Amid hardship, these families find ways to weave comfort into daily life. The smell of drying laundry grows stronger as you walk back toward the yard. A woman stands on a stool, pinning a damp sheet to the line. Its weight pulls downward as though it wants to return to the basin for another rinse. She steadies it with one hand and tells you the wind stole the last sheet she hung. She claims she chased it down the alley for a full block before giving up. Now she ties the corners with extra knots. You admire her determination. Everywhere you look, women are holding the slum together piece by piece. They mend, they wash, they cook, they soothe, they bargain, they patch both clothing and hope. Their labour is constant, invisible to anyone who does not stop to see it. You feel it clearly now as you step back into the alley, the hum of chores still echoing around you like a steady heartbeat. The day continues to stretch forward, carrying you toward another part of the slum, where the sounds shift again and the struggles take a different shape. You drift away from the yard where laundry flaps gently on the lines, and you step into another thin artery of the slum, where voices carry farther than footsteps. The buildings here lean inward, creating a natural funnel that amplifies every whisper, every sigh, every moment of tension or tenderness. You do not even need to press your ear to a wall to hear the life behind it. The walls themselves seem to speak. As you walk, a faint murmur reaches you through a cracked window. Someone is discussing the price of coal, complaining that it rose again, even though the quality fell. Another voice, lower and more guarded, mentions a neighbour who may have taken in an extra lodger without telling the landlord. In many Victorian slum districts, homes were so closely packed that overhearing strangers was unavoidable. This arrangement is widely recognised by urban historians as one of the defining traits of crowded tenements, and you feel that truth vividly now as you move through the narrow path. You turn a corner and find a group of women clustered around a doorway speaking in hushed but animated tones. One woman swears she saw the baker's apprentice sneaking out at dawn with a parcel far too heavy to contain ordinary bread. Another insists it was nothing more than flour. A third claims she knows for a fact that the boy hides letters inside his apron for a man who travels between taverns. You cannot tell whether any of these theories contain a grain of truth, but they echo the kind of lively speculation that breathes energy into neighbourhoods like this. A child pokes his head out of a window above you and calls down to his friend in the street. He announces proudly that he knows who stole the missing kettle from the communal yard yesterday. He leans so far out that his mother yanks him back by the collar. He disappears with a yelp, leaving behind giggles drifting through the air like loose feathers. Children, it seems, are conduits of information, as much as messengers of trouble carrying on. You notice how each doorway has its own little world attached to it. The woman mending shawls knows the arguments of everyone on her floor. The old man smoking by the stairwell can tell you which couple quarrels every Wednesday and which tenant pays rent late every month. He taps his pipe against the railing and offers you a grin as if to say that knowledge is a form of currency here. And in truth it is. You pass by a pair of young men leaning against a wall trying to look casual, while clearly watching someone's window. One of them mutters that the woman living upstairs received a parcel yesterday marked with a fancy seal. His friend speculates wildly about its contents. A letter from a lost relative, an invitation to a new job, a bribe, a secret lover's note. Their guesses grow more dramatic with each breath. What really arrived in that parcel will probably never be known, giving you your odd little curiosity for this part of the story. Near the next corner, a short row of dwellings sit so close together that their roofs nearly touch. Voices drift between the open windows like migrating birds. You hear laughter, coughing spoons, clinking a lullaby sung just out of tune, and the rhythmic sweeping of someone brushing their steps with worn bristles. The mingled sounds feel intimate, like eaves dropping on 100 tiny stories without meaning to. You pause when you hear two neighbours disputing something through a shared partition. The argument is over the noise from a broken chair that someone dragged across the floor late last night. One neighbour insists it happened at exactly midnight. The other says it was nearer to 2 o'clock in the morning. A handful of scholars who study slum culture still differ in their interpretations of how much conflict arose from thin walls and how much stemmed from general tension and scarcity. Listening to the bickering now, you sense the truth lies somewhere in between. You continue forward, stepping over puddles and loose stones. To your right, a door swings open, and a man emerges holding a newspaper folded into neat quarters. He squints at you and asks if you heard about the butcher on the next street, who was caught watering down his gravy again. You raise an eyebrow. It is only 10 o'clock in the morning, and the day already brims with rumours. He nods gravely as if confirming the importance of such a revelation, and then retreats back inside, before you can ask a single question. The further you walk, the more tangled the web of voices becomes. Someone laughs with a booming crack of joy that slices through the morning. Another person mutters about lost gloves. A young woman beside you whispers to her friend that she heard footsteps on the stair last night that did not belong to anyone who lived there. Her friend gasps, theatrically encouraging the tale. You catch snippets about mysterious shadows, creaky doors, and an unfamiliar hat found by the banister. Whether any of it happened, or whether the slum simply breeds stories like wildflowers, you cannot decide. You pass a wooden railing where an older woman sits peeling potatoes into a bucket. She nods politely as you approach, then lowers her voice to tell you that the man across the alley speaks in his sleep. She says he mumbles secrets, though she will not reveal what she has learned. Her expression is half amused, half proud, as though she holds the keys to hidden dramas. On the opposite wall, someone has scribbled a message in chalk. It appears to be a joke at a landlord's expense. You cannot help but grin. Humour like this slips through the cracks of hardship, reminding you that even the most oppressed communities find ways to laugh at authority. Around the next bend, the path grows quieter for a moment. You hear a woman inside a room reading aloud to her children. Her voice warm and steadied by love. It softens the harsh atmosphere, wrapping itself around you like a borrowed blanket. You linger, appreciating the moment of calm before continuing onward. As you walk, it becomes clear that privacy in the slums is more myth than reality. Secrets survive only if wrapped in layers of noise, or if kept behind expressions trained not to betray them. Gossip is not merely entertainment here. It is a method of understanding, of mapping the dangers and promises hidden in crowded streets. Neighbours may squabble, but they also protect one another with the intensity of people bound by circumstance. You reach the end of the lane where the gossip thins, replaced by the distant clatter of horses and vendors. Before you step out, you glance back, noticing how many windows remain cracked open, how many conversations flow freely, how many tiny dramas weave together. You take one last breath of this noisy tapestry and move on, carrying with you the sense that in these walls, stories never stop whispering. You step into a wider street that bursts with noise the moment your foot touches its edge. The slums may be tight and crowded, but this stretch feels like its own living creature breathing sound into every crack and echoing it back twice as loud. You blink against the sudden brightness as the clouds shift, letting thin sunlight spill between chimney stacks. The first sound to reach you is the rhythmic clop of horse hooves. They strike the cobblestones with an uneven beat, as though the animals themselves are tired of carrying the weight of the city. A cab trundles past its driver, shouting for room, even though there is no room to give. The wheels spray thin droplets from last night's rain. You step aside to avoid being splashed, though your boots still catch a cold fleck or two. Further ahead, you hear vendors calling out their goods. A fishmonger shouts prices loud enough to rattle window panes. The man beside him advertises cured herring so enthusiastically that you suspect he might sell you the idea of fish, rather than the fish itself. Street cries like these were known to be one of the most distinctive features of London's poorer districts, described often in old diaries and reports. You feel that reality settle into place as the vendors compete for your attention, with voices sharpened by years of practice. Closer to you, a knife grinder turns the wheel on his portable stand. Sparks spit outward in tiny bursts as he sharpens a blade. He sings under his breath some half-remembered tune, while customers wait patiently. The grinding wheel hums like a restless insect. You feel the vibration through the soles of your feet each time he presses metal to stone. Behind you, a woman haggles loudly with a cola. She insists his measure is smaller than yesterday. He argues the bucket has not changed. The exchange grows spirited. A few onlookers weigh in, offering opinions neither party asked for. Whether such quarrels reflected genuine disputes, or simply the day's entertainment remains uncertain among those who have studied slum culture. Listening now, you suspect both explanations hold some truth. A group of children run past you, weaving between adults with the precision of street-trained acrobats. One carries a hoop, rolling it along with a stick, the clatter of metal against wood, ringing sharply each time it wobbles. Another blows on a reed whistle, producing a sound so piercing you feel it in your teeth. He grins proudly at your reaction and darts away. Nearby, a man balances a tray strapped to his chest, selling sugared nuts that glisten under the morning light. As he walks, the nuts rattle inside the metal tin like tiny pebbles in a drum. He claims they give strength to anyone who eats them. He even tells you that once a street performer ate 3 handfuls and lifted a cart with his bare hands. You doubt the story, but the confidence in his voice makes it oddly delightful. You sidestep a puddle just as a woman empties wash water from her upper window. The splash hits the stones and runs toward a drain already clogged with debris. A dog trots by, not bothering to avoid the water, and shakes itself violently as soon as it reaches dry ground. Droplets spray in all directions. The dog looks immensely satisfied, even as a man curses at it for wetting his trousers. Farther along the street, you hear the steady beat of a drum. A street performer sits on an overturned crate, tapping a rhythm that pulls a small crowd toward him. His hat sits in front of him with only 2 coins inside. He plays anyway, eyes closed, his head bobbing gently. The deep thump of the drum reverberates through your ribs, a grounding sound amid the frantic noise around you. Ahead, you notice a group of boys gathering around a lamppost. One of them beats on the metal with a stick, producing a loud, hollow ring. His friends try to mimic the sound on nearby gates and fences, creating an accidental orchestra of clanging music. A passerby laughs and calls it the best performance of the day. The boys bow dramatically before running off again. You pass a row of market stalls, each producing its own distinct flavour of sound. A cloth seller snaps his fabric sharply to show their weave. The crisp flaps echo down the lane. A vegetable vendor rustles through piles of wilted greens, tossing them with quick flicks of his wrist. A man selling second-hand boots thumps each pair against his knee to prove their sturdiness, even though the mismatched soles betray the truth. Someone behind you whistles a tune so shrill that birds erupt from a nearby roof. Their wings beat the air in a sudden swooping flurry. Feathers drift down like lazy snowflakes. A child reaches out and catches one examining it with the seriousness of a scientist. At the far end of the street, a cart rolls slowly past, carrying a load of scrap metal. Each bump sends the pile shifting with a thunderous clatter. The driver scolds his horse gently, telling it not to startle at the noise. You cannot help smiling. Even his voice competes with the chaos around him. You pause for a moment in the midst of it all, letting the layers of sound soak into you. The slums may struggle for food, for water, for warmth, but they never lack noise. It is the lifeblood of the streets, a constant reminder that thousands of people live within arm's reach, each one adding their breath and voice to the city's restless chorus. Yet even here, where volume reigns, smaller sounds slip through, a window creaking open, a spoon stirring tea, a broom brushing the threshold. You catch these delicate notes between louder bursts, their subtlety almost soothing. You resume walking, letting the soundscape shift around you like a tide. The horses, the cries, the clatter, the laughter, the arguments, the music, it all blends into one long hum that follows you even as you near the next bend. Noise here is not an interruption. It is the language of survival, the daily soundtrack of people carving out, lives with resilience, humour, and stubborn endurance. And as you step into the shadow of the alley beyond, the cacophony softens behind you, like a door closing gently on a room still full of life. You follow the fading street noise until it dissolves into a quieter corridor that curves like a question mark. The smell here is thicker, earthier, and you sense immediately that you are entering one of the infamous pockets of the slums. Locals call these tight clusters of buildings rookery districts. The name lingers because the structures crowd together like birds' nests perched on top of one another. The roofs sag, the bricks seem to lean in conversation. The air grows tighter around your shoulders as you step inside. The path narrows to a cramped lane. Two walls stand so close together that your elbows nearly scrape both. If you stretch out your arms, the ground beneath you is soft in places, packed with mud, straw, and whatever else has been thrown aside by passing residents. Water trickles along a shallow gutter carved by years of footsteps. In the dimness, you notice faint footprints from someone who must have walked through the muck barefoot. You try not to imagine how cold that must have felt. A group of people slip past you in a hurry. Their movements are swift and silent, as though they know every uneven plank, every hollow step, every shadow well enough to navigate without raising a sound. You catch a glimpse of a woman's face just as she passes you. She nods politely, then vanishes around the bend as if swallowed by the alley itself. Tenements like these were widely recognised in contemporary reports for containing some of the most congested living spaces in Victorian cities. That understanding settles over you as you observe how entire families flow through these passages as easily as water. The smell shifts again when you turn left. You detect cooking smoke, but also the sour tang of refuse, and something damp that you decide not to name. A low building at the corner leans precariously supported by wooden beams wedged beneath it, like makeshift crutches. You hear faint laughing inside. Someone knocks over a tin cup. The walls shudder slightly, as though offended. A man sits outside on a crate, peeling a piece of fruit that looks more bruised than flesh. He greets you with a tired smile. He warns you to watch your step near the far end of the lane, 'cause one of the boards covers a hole that leads straight into an abandoned cellar. He claims a goat once disappeared into it and emerged on the other side of the courtyard wearing a wash basin like a crown. Whether that story is truth exaggeration or simply neighbourhood charm, it serves as your eccentric slum tale for this section. A few steps ahead, you reach a wider courtyard. Children play here even though the mud reaches their ankles. They leap from stone to stone, pretending the ground is molten lava. One child slips and lands with a splash. He laughs so loudly that even the adults smile. A woman washing clothes in a basin calls for him to watch himself. He waves at her completely unbothered. You notice how each building in the courtyard carries its own scars. Broken shutters hang at odd angles. Doors tilt as though weighing whether to stay upright. Strips of cloth substitute for curtains. One family has patched a missing window with cardboard and clay. Another has hung a quilt that looks older than the building itself. The creativity used to keep out drafts feels both admirable and heartbreaking. A man emerges from a doorway carrying a wooden bucket filled with scraps of food. He sets it beside a group of crows that gather eagerly. He tells you he saves leftovers for them because they keep the rats in check. You watch the birds peck at the contents, their wings fluttering with a certain rude confidence. The man shrugs at your expression. He swears the crows understand gratitude better than some tenants. You cannot tell if he is joking, but the birds certainly seem proud enough to believe him. As you continue deeper, the courtyard funnels into another narrow passage. This one slopes downward, guiding you into an even denser area. The air grows heavier. The daylight thins. You feel as if the buildings have decided to close ranks around you. The uneven stones beneath your boots click and shift. A faint trickle of water slides past your foot and disappears into a crack you had not seen. In the dim nook around the next corner, two teenagers sit beside a stack of crates, whispering rapidly. They fall silent when you approach, evaluating you with guarded eyes. One finally nods in greeting. He tells you, people say the rookery breathes at night, that the walls creak in ways that sound like sighs. You listen for a moment. A slow groan rises from somewhere above you. It could be settling timbers. It could be wind pushing at an old window. Or perhaps it really is the neighbourhood itself exhaling under the weight of so many lives. No one can say with certainty, and that uncertainty alone offers the scholarly puzzle for this section. Academics who study these districts often disagree about how much of the atmosphere was physical decay and how much was psychological strained. You press on adjusting your pace as the ground becomes slick. Lantern light flickers ahead. Someone has hung it from a nail hammered into a leaning post. The light casts long shadows across the walls, turning every crack and nail head into something more dramatic than it deserves to be. The flicker dances over a puddle that reflects the lantern flame like a trembling coin. Around the next bend, you find a small gathering of neighbours outside a cramped doorway. They sit on overturned buckets talking quietly. One woman mends a shawl while the man beside her repairs a broken handle. Their calm amid the crowded chaos strikes you. They pause their work long enough to greet you before easing back into conversation. Their voices blend into the hum of the alley. Nearby, a young boy crouches beside a mound of discarded wood. He arranges the pieces into a shape that vaguely resembles a house. When you compliment his handiwork, he tells you he is building a mansion. His grin widens as he points out the imaginary windows, balconies, and gardens. His enthusiasm rises above the gloom of the rookery like a small flame in a dark room. His sister joins him, adding sticks to the roof. The two laugh as they work together, creating a dream home in the middle of a place where roofs threaten to fall. You continue through the alley, noting how every sound reverberates. A baby crying inside one room becomes a soft wail drifting through the walls. A kettle knocking against a hearthstone creates a rhythm that follows you. Even the scrape of your own boots feels louder than usual. Ahead, a wooden staircase climbs toward upper rooms. It cacks with each passing person. You watch a woman ascend carefully, balancing a basin on her hip. With each step, the staircase shivers, but it holds. She reaches the landing and vanishes behind a faded curtain. The curtain sways for a moment, then settles again. You notice a doorway on your right where a man sits cleaning a pair of cracked spectacles. He squints up at you and explains that he fixes broken items for neighbours in exchange for meals. The spectacles tremble slightly in his fingers. He tells you one lens is older than he is. You believe him. The lens looks like it has seen entire generations grow up and move away. As you move toward the edge of the rookery, the space widens once more. A patch of open sky appears between the rooftops. You feel the air lighten. A faint breeze stirs your hair. The rookery behind you murmurs with layered sounds, a mixture of life, hardship, humour, and stubbornness. You stand for a moment, absorbing its pulse. Then you take a step forward, feeling the shift as you leave one of the slum's densest pockets and head toward the bustling markets that await on the next street. You move from the rookery's tight embrace into a slightly wider artery of the slum, where the air feels livelier, more restless. A cluster of makeshift stalls stretches across the lane ahead, and you can already hear the hum of trading voices rising and falling like a tide. You step closer, letting the market draw you in with its curious assortment of goods that shift daily depending on what the city discards, forgets, or loses. The first stall you pass is little more than a plank laid across two crates. A woman sorts through heaps of metal scraps, holding each piece up to the light before dropping it into piles marked by size and potential usefulness. Many slum dwellers relied on buying and selling salvage from the city's waste, something frequently mentioned in old charity surveys and municipal reports. As you watch her nimble hands, you see exactly how those records came to be. She senses value where others see trash. A few steps farther, a young man stands behind a row of glass bottles arranged like small soldiers. The bottles are mismatched and chipped, but he has scrubbed them until they gleam. He calls out to you, offering one at half price if you can guess what it used to contain. You pick up a squat green one and sniff it carefully. He grins and tells you it once held medicine strong enough to knock out a grown man for hours. Whether this is a marketing trick or a half-truth memory passed down from someone else, it registers as your unconventional little curiosity for this section. You weave deeper into the market, listening to the flurry of negotiations around you. A fur seller argues with a customer over the price of a coat that has clearly changed owners too many times. A man selling tools waves a bench wrench in the air and insists it is sturdier than it looks. A woman hawking dried herbs claims hers cure headaches faster than prayer. The mingled scents of earth smoke and wilted leaves envelop you as you maneuver around their stalls. At the centre of the market, a large wooden table holds an eclectic collection of items spread out like puzzle pieces. Mismatched shoes, tarnished spoons, bits of ribbon, fragments of broken toys, and even an old pocket watch missing its hands. A group of children dig through the pile with enthusiasm, searching for anything that could become play or treasure. You cannot blame them. In a place where new things are rare, imagination becomes the currency of joy. A man with a patched coat sets up a small scale on a barrel. He sells spices by the pinch. Each jar contains only a few spoonfuls, but their scents are surprisingly strong. Cinnamon, pepper, clove, something unfamiliar and bitter. You inhale gently as he opens a lid to serve another customer. The aroma lifts your spirits briefly. He explains that he buys his spices in bulk from a trader who barters with sailors down at the docks. Whether that middleman gets them cheaply or illegally is unclear, and several historians remain divided on how often slum markets relied on stolen or smuggled imports. As you listen to the spice seller, the uncertainty feels fitting. Markets like this thrive in the blurry spaces between survival and legality. You move along, stopping near a vendor selling rescued furniture parts, Chael's mismatched drawer knobs, fragments of carved wood. A thin man with a dusty hat proudly demonstrates how a broken table leg can be repurposed into a sturdy hammer handle. He taps it against his palm and winks at you, insisting that nothing in the slums truly dies as long as someone can imagine a new life for it. His hopeful philosophy lingers with you as you continue. The next stool sells food scraps. Not meals, not ingredients, but genuine leftovers collected from taverns in wealthier households. A woman with sharp eyes sorts through what appears to be vegetable ends, half-eaten rolls, and a cold slice of something that might once have been pie. She arranges them neatly on trays. People come by and select pieces, carefully choosing what can still be boiled, mashed, fried, or stretched into something edible. You watch one man pick up a limp piece of carrot and tuck it into his pocket like a small victory. To your left, a boy walks through the market carrying a basket of ribbons. They are frayed at the edges, faded from years of sunlight, or dotted with stains that only a creative eye can forgive. He sells them cheaply and claims they can make any dress look grand. His confidence is infectious. A young girl buys a handful and wraps one around her wrist like a bracelet. She beams at her reflection in a cracked mirror propped against a wall. A commotion erupts nearby when a customer discovers a rat nestled in a stack of old books. The rodent scampers away, darting under a stall with astonishing speed. The vendor apologizes to everyone, swearing. He did not know the creature was hiding there. Then he taps the stack of books fondly and says, "The rat must have excellent taste." The crowd laughs, tension broken instantly. You notice a cluster of stalls selling clothing, jackets without buttons, dresses missing hems, boots with soles worn thin. Shoppers inspect each item with a careful eye, knowing they can patch or reshape almost anything. A grandmother tests the elasticity of a frayed shawl, pulling it gently. A young man holds up a coat to his shoulders, imagining how it might look once cleaned. A mother negotiates fiercely for 2 shirts, pressing her argument until the vendor relents with a theatrical sigh. Just beyond the clothing stalls, a merchant sits on a mat displaying trinkets, pocket knives, marbles, old coins, figurines carved from soap. He invites you to take your pick. You pick up a small statue shaped like a cat. He claims sailors brought it from somewhere far away, though he cannot say where exactly. You run your thumb across its surface. It feels oddly smooth. You set it down gently, and he nods as though granting you an unspoken blessing. As you make your way toward the far end of the market, you hear a sudden sharp whistle. A constable passes by, scanning the crowd with a practiced grimace. Some of the vendors stiffen, others pretend not to notice him. The tension eases only after he rounds the corner. The market resumes its lively rhythm, as though holding its breath for only a moment. You continue until the stalls thin and the smell of spices and smoke fades behind you. A final vendor calls out, offering a cracked mirror to bargain price. You decline kindly. He shrugs and begins polishing its surface anyway, hoping to convince the next passerby. Leaving the market, you feel its energy lingering in your hands and ears. The chaos, the creative resourcefulness, the relentless bargaining. This place may be filled with scraps and cast-offs, but in the hands of the slums residents, everything carries potential. You walk onward with the sense that the market has shown you a kind of resilience that cannot be bought or sold, only lived. You follow the thinning path until the market's lively chatter fades behind you, replaced by a deeper, quieter heaviness in the air. Even before you turn the next corner, you feel the shift. The breeze grows still. The sounds soften. Something invisible presses lightly against your chest. When you step into the lane ahead, you understand why people tread cautiously here. Illness is a familiar visitor in the slums, slipping through cracks, drifting through windows, settling in lungs that have already breathed too much dust and smoke. The first thing you notice is the scent. It is faint but sharp, a mixture of damp wood, boiled herbs, and something metallic that lingers like a memory you do not want to name. A woman leans out of a doorway, wringing a cloth dampened with vinegar. She hangs it across the frame in hopes it will purify the air. Many households did this according to descriptions from the period, believing that sharp odour could ward off sickness. The habit appears again and again in old letters and domestic guides, forming your well-attested detail for this section. As you watch her pin the cloth in place, you feel both the hope and the desperation behind the gesture. Inside the same house, you hear coughing. Not the quick dry cough of dust, but the deep rattling kind that seems to echo even after the breath ends. You step forward, drawn by concern rather than curiosity. In the doorway, a boy stands, holding a cup of cooling tea. He presses a finger to his lip, signalling you to keep quiet. His mother lies in a cot behind him, her face pale and glistening. The boy lifts the cup to her lips, but she turns away weakly. He sighs, lowers the cup, and wipes her forehead with gentle, practiced care. You back away respectfully, feeling the weight of sickness settle onto the street like a drifting fog. As you continue walking, the lane opens into a yard where several women sit together, peeling onions and boiling herbs. The steam rises in ghost-like trails. One woman tells you they are making a tonic recommended by a neighbour whose aunt swore it could calm fevers. She adds that sometimes it works and sometimes it does nothing at all. Another woman, older and more cynical, murmurs that if onions could cure illness, the slums would have been paradise long ago. You sense a strange blend of hope and resignation in her voice. A stray cat pads past you, its ribs visible beneath its fur. It rubs against a step where a pot of water has been spilled. You watch as the cat licks the wet stone. A man sitting nearby warns you that the pump's water has been tasting strange lately. He explains that some days it runs clear, other days it comes out cloudy, and once it even smelled sweet. He laughs at the memory, but only briefly. The joke thins quickly. It becomes your odd local fragment for the section, the kind of story people repeat to make sense of their uncertain surroundings. You step onward, passing a narrow alley where laundry hangs as though clinging to the air. Beneath it, a woman folds blankets that appear too heavy with dampness to ever fully dry. Her face carries a tired calm. She tells you she is preparing the blankets for the neighbours whose children have fallen ill. She adds quietly that warmth can sometimes save a life in these parts. You nod, unsure how to respond to the truth, woven into a simple statement. Ahead, you come across a man sitting on a stool outside his cramped home. His breathing is shallow, his lips pale. He clutches a small cloth pouch filled with dried leaves. He tells you he bought them from a peddler who promised they would strengthen his lungs. The man admits he does not know what the leaves are. He only knows he cannot afford a doctor. Medical records from the era repeatedly mention that professional care was beyond reach for most slum residents, leaving them dependent on home remedies and the advice of neighbours. You feel that documented reality as clearly as if it were written across the man's face. A cart rattles past its wheels, wobbling dangerously. Two men walk beside it, carrying bundles of bedding that look far too worn to be salvaged. One says they're taking the linens to be burned. The other mutters that burning does little good, but at least it makes people feel safer. You overhear them discuss whether the illness spreading this week comes from spoiled water from the crowded rooms or from the cold dampness that never fully leaves the walls. Their conversation mirrors the divide among modern researchers who continue to reach different conclusions about the biggest drivers of disease in such neighbourhoods. Listening to them now, you realise uncertainty is as much a part of slum life as scarcity. You continue forward until the lane widens again, forming a crooked intersection. A group of neighbours gather at its centre, sharing news in low voices. One woman says a fever struck 3 members of her family in the night. Another says she saw a man collapse near the pump that morning. A third whispers that a healer passed through earlier, offering a tea made of boiled bark to strengthen the blood. No one knows whether it works. Still, a few decide they will try it. Their faces hold a fragile balance between fear and determination. One doorway catches your eye because of the strange array of objects hanging beside it. Dried lavender tied with twine. A small glass vial filled with cloudy liquid. A string of polished stones. The woman living there invites you to look more closely. She tells you she puts these items near her door to guard her family against illness and misfortune. The objects, she says, were gifts from friends, each carrying some tiny promise of protection. You notice how carefully she arranged them, treating them almost like sacred tools. Even if the charms hold no real power, they offer comfort in a place where comfort is scarce. A fitful wind stirs the lane, lifting dust in brief swirls. You pull your collar closer as the cold slips under your coat. The neighbours do the same. Several glance upward at the murky sky as though trying to read something in the shifting clouds. Farther along, a man sweeps the step outside his home with short, vigorous motions. He tells you he does this every day at the same hour because it makes him feel like he has some control over the sickness creeping through the slum. A few children approach him, watching quietly. He pauses and tells them to stay warm, to stay dry, to stay where he can see them. They nod solemnly the way children do when they understand more than adults wish they did. You pause beside a wall marked with faint chalk lines. Someone scrolled a message there earlier. Stay inside if you can. The handwriting is crooked, hurried. You touch the chalk lightly and feel it crumble beneath your fingertips. You think about the families reading that message. Some might listen. Others might have no choice but to leave their homes for work, food, or water. The slum offers few luxuries and safety rarely ranks among them. As you reach the end of the lane, you hear another round of coughing break out behind you. It echoes faintly, weaving itself into the air you breathe. You glance back once more and watch as a woman closes her door with slow, careful movements, as though trying not to disturb whatever illness lurks inside. You take a deep breath, though the air feels heavy, and step into the next passageway. The smell of smoke returns, masking some of the sickness, but not all. You move forward, carrying with you the weight of the stories you've witnessed. The herbs, the whispered worries, the blankets, the charms, the quiet heroism of people caring for one another in places where medicine feels like a dream. You walk onward, letting the air shift around you as the lane narrows again. The sounds of sickness fade behind you, replaced by the low rumble of conversation, spoken with dread, caution, and calculation. When you turn the next corner, you sense trouble before you see it. A group of tenants huddle near a doorway, their eyes flicking nervously toward the street. You recognize the tightness in their shoulders. It is the particular tension that arrives on the days when the rent collector prowls through the slums. UI is closer, moving with the crowd's rhythm. A woman standing near the wall whispers that he is already on the street clipboard, tucked under his arm boots, polished as though preparing for a parade. She presses her lips together, as if the very idea of polished boots is an insult in a place where most people cannot afford new laces. Her comment reminds you of something you once read in an old account. Many slum landlords hired collectors who prided themselves on immaculate appearances, as though sharp boots made their demands more legitimate. That pattern appears across various written testimonies of the era, firmly rooting the moment you witness. Now, when you step into the main stretch of the street, you see him immediately. The rent collector strides with exaggerated confidence, his coat swinging at his knees. His mustache twitches with every step. He carries a small ledger that looks plump with unpaid names. Behind him, a younger assistant drags a bag filled with notices folded, so neatly they could almost be invitations to a party. You suspect no one here feels honoured to receive one. You watch as he stops at the first door. He knocks sharply, 2 quick taps. One slow. The rhythm is unmistakable. It sends a ripple of unease through the slum. Inside the room, someone shuffles hurriedly. A woman opens the door, only a crack. The collector leans in like a fox sniffing a hen house. Their conversation is brief, clipped, and heavy with excuses. Eventually, he scribbles something in his ledger, shakes his head dramatically, and moves on. You follow him at a short distance. A man beside you mutters that collectors sometimes raise the rent without warning and expect gratitude for not doubling it. Whether that practice was widespread or invented by tenants to express their frustration remains unclear, even to researchers piecing together housing patterns from the time. The uncertainty itself feels fitting as you witness the confusion and resignation on people's faces. The collector reaches the next home. A mother steps outside holding a coin purse so thin, it seems to contain hope more than money. Her toddler clings to her skirt. She opens the purse to show him its sad contents. He sighs, taps his pen against the ledger, and informs her she must pay by evening or risk eviction. She nods with the polite despair of someone who has heard this warning far too many times. When she turns away, her face crumples briefly before she regains her composure and returns inside. A few steps later, the collector stops at a home where the tenants have clearly prepared for his arrival. A man steps out holding several small coins wrapped in cloth. He hands them over with stiff pride. The collector counts them slowly, his eyebrow arching as though they might vanish between his fingers. Satisfied, he nods curtly and snaps his ledger shut. The tension in the man's shoulders melts at once. A child watching from the doorway claps quietly, sensing victory. As you move farther along the row, you hear whispers darting through windows like startled birds. People ask whether he is in a foul mood today, whether he will issue more warnings than usual, whether he will accept partial payment from a family known to be struggling. Some tenants hold their breath when he passes. Others stare at the floor. A few glare defiantly at him through cracked shutters. In one doorway, A woman and her elderly father sit waiting. She holds a small envelope, smoothing the edges again and again. When the collector reaches them, she rises to hand it over. He opens it, counts the money, then pauses. He tilts his head toward her father, studying him with clinical detachment. The father straightens his shoulders, but struggles to maintain the posture. You sense the painful question about to surface. Will the old man's illness make the collector more demanding or less? The moment stretches painfully. Finally, the collector nods and marks the payment as accepted. Relief washes across the woman's face like a small sunrise. A few doors down, the collector stops and frowns. He raps loudly on the frame. No answer comes. He knocks again. Still silence. Neighbours exchange uneasy looks. Finally, he pulls a paper from his bag and pins it to the door. A notice, perhaps a warning, perhaps worse. A woman whispers that the tenant left 2 nights ago and never returned. The collector shrugs and moves on, but the neighbours do not shrug. They murmur about what might have happened, illness at jail, or simply vanishing to search for work somewhere else. In slum life, disappearances are rarely simple, and explanations are often stories stitched together from fragments. You continue following him, watching how each home responds with its own brand of fear or frustration. One girl stands in the doorway, clutching a broom, as though preparing to defend her household from bad news. A man further down pretends not to be home, whispering orders to his children to stay silent. A few brave souls step out to confront the collector. They raise their voices, pointing out the leaky roofs and broken windows the landlord still refuses to fix. They argue that payment should wait until repairs are made. The collector listens politely, nods at the right moments, then informs them they can either pay the rent or vacate. Their shoulders sag as he walks away. One home, though, greets him differently. A woman opens her door with a large grin and immediately floods him with chatter about the success of her recent mending work. She thrusts a handful of coins into his palm before he can utter a word. Her enthusiasm blindsides him. For a moment, he forgets his practiced frown. She waves as he leaves, wiping sweat from her brow once he is out of sight. You realise the performance may have been for her own morale as much as for his. Deeper in the lane, you find a knot of neighbours whispering urgently. You pause to listen. They say the collector is planning to inspect an abandoned room that someone has been secretly subletting. Apparently, 2 brothers moved in without permission. The group debates what might happen if they are discovered. Some believe the landlord will evict them immediately. Others think an unofficial fee will be demanded to look the other way. Evidence from period newspapers hints that both outcomes occurred depending on the collector's temperament and the landlord's greed, leaving modern interpretations mixed. At the end of the street, the collector closes his ledger with a sharp snap. His assistant gathers the remaining notices. The neighbourhood exhales all at once. Windows open, doors creak. People who had hidden step back into the light. The tension that gripped the air begins to lift, though it leaves behind a faint trembling like a muscle tired from clenching too long. You watch as the collector strides toward the next district, his polished boots carrying him away. Behind him, the slum slowly restitches itself. Neighbours emerge to console one another. Some celebrate by splitting whatever small coins remain. Others slump onto crates, calculating how to script together the next payment. You move on too, leaving the echoes of fear and frustration behind you. The street gradually loosens its grip. As you turn the corner, you hear the distant hum of music and laughter drifting toward you. It seems the slum is preparing to shift moods yet again, reminding you that even in hardship, moments of joy can bloom in the unlikeliest places. You follow the faint thread of laughter drifting from around the corner, letting it tug you toward a part of the slum where the mood shifts noticeably. After the tense hush surrounding the rent collector, the sound of easy voices feels like stepping into a patch of sunlight. You enter a small courtyard ringed by leaning brick walls, and at once you sense the air lighten. People here gather in clusters, sharing stories, songs and brief escapes from the weight of daily struggle. A pair of young women sit on overturned crates near a wash line, tapping spoons against tin mugs in a gentle rhythm. The tune they create is simple, repetitive, and surprisingly calming. Their movements are light and practiced, suggesting they have shared this moment many times. In the 1800s, slum districts were often described in personal letters as places where spontaneous music erupted even on the hardest days. Those accounts come to mind as you watch the women laugh softly between each verse, their shoulders easing with every tap. Nearby, a man tunes a battered violin. The wood is scratched, the strings mismatched, and one peg looks like it was carved from a kitchen handle. Yet when he drags the bow across the strings, a warm sound unfurls into the air. Children gather immediately, drawn to the melody like moths to a lantern flame. The man grins at them, switching the tune to something faster that makes the little ones begin to hop in eager wobbly dances. You watch as a girl in a red patch dress spins on one foot. Her arms stretch out wide, and she nearly topples into a bucket of laundry. The adults chuckle, helping her regain balance. A street performer once wrote in his journal about children in poor neighbourhoods, turning any open space into a dance floor, even if it meant dodging buckets, chickens, or laundry lines. That recollection feels very alive as you watch the scene unfold. A boy beside you begins juggling 3 small objects. You realise with a start that 2 are stones, and the third is a shriveled turnip. His face holds fierce concentration as he tosses them higher and higher. He calls out proudly that he learned the trick from a sailor who passed through the docks last summer. One of the adults claims that sailor could juggle flaming sticks blindfolded. Another neighbour promptly retorts that the sailor could barely juggle his own boots. The debate dissolves into laughter, becoming your odd moment of local humour for this section. A group of women sit together near a chipped doorway, sharing scraps of gossip, but this time with smiles rather than suspicion. One speaks about her cousin who managed to attend a music hall show a few nights ago. She describes the performer as having a voice powerful enough to shake rafters loose. Another woman shakes her head and insists the rafters in most music halls are already loose. Their playful argument continues, and you find yourself smiling at the warmth in their voices. In one corner of the courtyard, a makeshift game begins. 2 men chalk a grid onto the stones and start flicking bottle caps across it with serious concentration. A crowd forms around them. The players take turns nudging the caps with precise, delicate snaps of their fingers. Someone nearby offers commentary with exaggerated flair, treating the match as though it were a sporting event. The crowd cheers each successful move and groans at each misstep. It is a simple game, but in this moment it holds the entire courtyard's attention. A few steps away, you hear the creak of an accordion. An older man sits against the wall, his fingers moving with gentle familiarity over the keys and bellows. The tune he chooses is slower with a wistful edge. Several neighbours pause to listen. One closes her eyes, another sways softly. The music seems to soften the very air. Even the children fall quiet, rocking gently on their heels. As the melody drifts, a woman approaches you with a bowl of something warm. She offers a spoonful and insists you try it. The rich scent makes your stomach respond instantly. She explains that it is a pudding, made from leftover bread raisins that had seen better days and a bit of lard. Recipes like this one appeared often in surviving household notes of the era, proof of the way families stretched the simplest ingredients into small luxuries. You taste a bite. It is sweeter than you expect. The woman beams proudly before returning to her seat. On the far side of the courtyard, 2 teenagers rehearse a short performance. One strikes dramatic poses, while the other recites lines from a popular stage play, though the words occasionally drift into improvised nonsense. A pair of younger children imitate them from behind, exaggeratedly flapping their arms or whispering every line a beat too late. The older performers pretend not to notice, though their ringing ears betray their amusement. You sit on a nearby step, letting the atmosphere settle around you. A gentle breeze carries the sounds of laughter, clapping music, and soft conversation. For a few minutes, the slum feels transformed, almost lighter. You remember reading that some reformers claimed these joyful pockets helped keep morale alive in neighbourhoods otherwise defined by deprivation. Others, however, argued that such moments were rare exceptions rather than daily occurrences. Those differing interpretations linger in your thoughts as you watch joy flourish here. Fragile yet persistent. A woman with a baby on her hip walks past you, humming under her breath. The baby babbles back at her as though holding a conversation in its own private language. She adjusts. The child leans against the wall and sways gently in rhythm with the accordion's tune. Her eyes soften as she moves. For a moment, the world around her seems to shrink to just 2 heartbeats. The violinist finishes another lively song and bows deeply. The watching children applaud with exuberant enthusiasm. One boy throws his arms around the musician's waist in gratitude. The violinist laughs, ruffles the boy's hair, and promises another tune later if the crowd stays cheerful. You feel the warmth of that promise settle into your chest like a coal ember that never quite goes out. At the centre of the courtyard, someone suggests a shared game of storytelling. Neighbours gather in a circle, each adding a line to a tale that becomes more ridiculous with every voice. The story begins with a lost chicken and evolves into a saga involving an angry goose, a misplaced hat, and a heroic pigeon who saves the day with a perfectly timed peck. Everyone laughs so hard that tears stream down several faces. Even a few passers-by stop to listen, their expressions softening as they catch bits of the tale. You notice a small girl perched on a barrel swinging her legs. She watches everything with wide eyes, absorbing the sounds and faces around her with thoughtful intensity. When you catch her eye, she points to the laughing adults and whispers that this is her favourite time of day. You nod, glad she has something to hold on to in a place where childhood often bends under the weight of necessity. A faint scent of baking drifts from a nearby window. Someone inside must be experimenting with leftover dough. The warmth of the smell envelops the courtyard for a brief moment, drawing appreciative sighs from those nearby. The violinist pauses mid-tune to sniff the air and announces that he will play twice as fast if someone brings him a piece. Laughter ripples through the crowd once more. As the sunlight begins to shift, sliding behind rooftops, the courtyard grows even livelier. It feels as though everyone is trying to gather as much joy as possible before the shadows lengthen and responsibilities return. Some neighbours sit closer together. Others stretch their limbs after long hours of toil. There is no grand celebration here, no feast or festival. Yet the simple act of being together becomes enough to fill the space with warmth. Eventually you rise from the step and begin to move toward the alley. As you leave, you glance back at the courtyard, now alive with dancing, joking, and gentle music. You carry the image with you. People carving joy out of scarcity, refusing to let hardship silence their laughter. The slum may be harsh in many ways, but its moments of happiness shine all the brighter for their rarity. You step forward, your ears still full of music, and your heart a little lighter, ready for whatever the next turn holds. You leave the courtyard behind, stepping into a stretch of the slum where the air feels sharper, almost watchful. The sounds of music and laughter fade quickly, replaced by footsteps that move with intention rather than ease. You notice at once how the atmosphere changes here. People walk a little faster, speak a little quieter, and glance over their shoulders with the caution of those who know the slumber's rules written nowhere, except in the instincts of its residents. The alley you enter is wider than most, but the shadows sit deeply along the walls. A pair of men lean near a doorway, heads bowed close as they exchange quick murmured words. When you approach, they fall silent and nod politely without offering a smile. You sense the quiet boundary here, an unspoken understanding that this stretch of the slum belongs to a different rhythm, one woven from necessity and risk. A cart rattles toward you, pulled by a lanky horse that looks one gust of wind away from collapse. The driver lifts a hand in greeting. His cart is piled with odds and ends, broken crates, twisted scrap metal, and bundles of cloth. He tells you calmly that he collects anything thrown out overnight. He adds that some of the best finds appear after fights, when tempers make people toss objects they regret losing. His comment echoes descriptions preserved in scattered police reports from the era, which noted how certain residents made a living gathering discarded goods before dawn. As you watch him nudge the horse onward, you feel those old accounts come to life. At the next corner, two boys run past you with such speed that you step back instinctively, One clutches something shiny beneath his coat. The other shouts for him to slow down. Their laughter rings out, though it carries a hint of mischief that keeps you alert. A woman sweeping her step mutters that children around here learn tricks faster than their elders can teach them. She says it fondly, but the way she watches the boys disappear suggests she knows those tricks can harden into habits. The world judges harshly. You continue walking until you reach a small square where people gather in cautious clusters. A man holding a cloth bag offers quiet greetings to certain passers-by. When someone palms him a coin, he opens the bag, slightly revealing trinkets that do not look entirely earned pocket watches with initials still carved into their backs, brooches missing only one stone, a silver spoon that gleams a little too brightly. Slum dwellers often relied on underground trading networks to survive. According to period observers who wrote about the shadow markets that coexisted with legal ones, you see that reality reflected now in the man's careful movements and the glances he exchanges with familiar customers. Someone nearby tells you that the man once traded a missing cufflink for a whole sack of potatoes. She leans closer and lowers her voice, adding that the cufflink supposedly belonged to a judge who lost it at a theatre. Whether the story happened or whether it is another enthusiastic piece of neighbourhood folklore, the teller recounts it with such conviction that you find yourself smiling in spite of its questionable origins. It becomes the strange little spark of local colour for this part of your journey. A few steps onward, the mood darkens again. You spot a woman with a shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, speaking to a man who stands too close and too calmly. Her eyes flick toward you, then away. He hands her something small, barely noticeable. She pockets it and slips past you without a word. The man stays where he is adjusting his coat. His expression gives away nothing. Yet everything around him feels too still, too staged. You decide not to linger. A group of older men sit on crates arranged in a semicircle by a tumble-down shed. They play a card game with such concentration that the world seems to shrink to the small surface between them. One man slaps down a card and laughs triumphantly. Another accuses him of cheating. The group erupts into friendly insults. A passerby tells you they play every afternoon, and that the pot never exceeds a few coins and a promise of bread. But the games, she says, keep them sharp in a place that dulls people far too quickly. You wander deeper into the alley network until you reach a cramped passage that smells faintly of moisture and old earth. There you find a young man leaning against a post. His coat is torn in two places, and his face carries a mix of exhaustion and defiance. He asks whether you have a spare coin. You shake your head gently. He nods without disappointment. Then he tells you he works as a runner for someone in the district carrying messages that cannot be entrusted to ordinary mail. When you ask what sort of messages, he shrugs and says some things are safer not spoken in daylight. The hint of danger that flickers in his eyes makes you step carefully around him. Farther along, you encounter a small gathering around a damaged doorway inside. A woman scolds a man for returning with empty pockets. He swears he was swindled by someone promising work down by the docks. She retorts that he fell for the same trick last month. Several bystanders shake their heads knowingly. Trickery, deception, and quick words often shape slum survival strategies. Various contemporary social investigators wrote about these patterns with equal parts criticism and sympathy. Their observations echo faintly as you watch the quarrel unfold, tinged with equal parts frustration and weariness. A moment later, a new noise pulls your attention. Metal clinks softly in the shadows. You turn and see a figure crouched beside a wall prying nails from a broken plank. When he notices you watching, he grins. He says nails are worth more than people think, especially to someone who can mend chairs or build crates. He wiggles one proudly, declaring it nearly as valuable as a coin if offered to the right person. His odd logic, delivered cheerfully, makes you laugh despite yourself. You keep moving until the alley spills into a dim courtyard, lit by a single flickering lantern. The people gathered here speak in low voices, trading news about troublemakers, pickpockets, and risky corners to avoid tonight. You hear mention of someone known only as Sparrow, a figure who appears and disappears with uncanny timing. Someone else claims to have seen Sparrow leap from a balcony to escape a constable. Another insists Sparrow is a myth. Modern studies of slum networks note that such shadowy characters often existed in half-truths, part person, part story, shaped by fear and fascination. Listening now, you sense that no one here truly knows, yet everyone insists they have the answer. The lantern guttering above you snaps loudly, pulling your focus upward. Moths collide with the glass fluttering chaotically each time the flame dims. A man seated beneath it mutters that the lantern has been repaired 4 times this month. He says the darkness encourages pickpockets, but the landlord refuses to replace it. His voice holds a resignation, shared by many, an acceptance that danger belongs as much to the slum as the bricks and cobblestones. Beyond the lantern, 2 women walk arm in arm, moving with purposeful strides. They greet you warmly and advise you not to linger near the next corner, explaining that tempers run on hot there at dusk. Their warning feels sincere, shaped by experience rather than superstition. You thank them and continue in the opposite direction, feeling the shift in atmosphere as you follow their advice. As you weave through the remaining turns of the district, the sounds around you settle into a quiet hum. Footsteps blend with hushed conversation. A cart cacks somewhere behind you. The odd clang of dropped metal rings briefly before fading. Crime in the slums is not a constant roar, but a series of subtle currents moving beneath daily life like water flowing under ice. Eventually, you step back into a different stretch of the neighbourhood where lamps glow steadily and the air lightens. You look over your shoulder once more, sensing the weight of what you walk through. The hidden exchanges, the whispered deals, the quiet rules. Everyone knows but never speaks aloud. Then you turn forward, ready for the next patch of night. The slum will reveal. You step cautiously into the next stretch of the slum, where the glow of lamps leans unevenly across the street. This is where authority lurks, not the comforting sort, but the stiff-collared kind that enters a neighbourhood, already suspicious of their gaze. The moment your boots touch the cobblestones, you feel the shift. Voices lower, doors ease shut, curtains breathe inward, as people glance through tiny gaps to measure the mood of the constables patrolling tonight. A faint jangle reaches you first, the sound of keys and truncheons swinging at an officer's belt. Then you see him, a tall man in a blue coat, striding along the lane as if it belongs to him. His companion, shorter but broader, carries a lantern that sways with each step, sending circles of pale light over the stones. Their presence unsettles the air. In many diaries and civic reports from the era, observers noted how the police presence in poorer districts was often heavier, more suspicious, and far less welcome than in wealthier areas. Watching the patrol push forward, you feel the truth of those old accounts pressed close. The taller officer stops near a group of boys leaning against a wall. They stiffen instantly. One kicks a pebble away with exaggerated innocence. Another hides something behind his back, a slingshot maybe, or simply a handful of crumbs he does not want confiscated. The officer asks what they're doing. The boys mumble vague answers. He narrows his eyes but eventually moves on. The moment he turns away, the boys exhale loudly and scatter into the shadows, vanishing as easily as stray cats. You follow the patrol from a small distance. Their lantern light wavers over crates, barrels and buckets. At one point, the beam glints off a shard of broken glass. The shorter officer bends down, sniffs the piece, and mutters something about spilled gin. He shakes his head, as though disappointed in the very idea of joy. You pass a woman who stands with her arms folded tightly across her chest. She nods at you, then jerks her chin in the officer's direction. She whispers that they have been prowling the slum all week. Some say they are searching for a missing parcel from a warehouse. Others insist they are responding to an argument that turned ugly 2 nights ago. Rumours flicker faster than a lamplight here, and tonight they illuminate the street with equal intensity. You turn another corner and nearly collide with a constable who has stopped abruptly to examine the ground. He crouches holding the lantern low. You see a series of muddy prints leading behind a stack of crates. He calls to his partner. The way his voice echoes makes your pulse flicker. They disappear behind the crates for a moment, and someone in a nearby window quickly pulls the curtain shut. When the officers re-emerge, they carry nothing except frustration. They mutter to each other and continue on. A little farther along, you hear a door open cautiously. A man steps out, clutching a folded paper. He tries to pass it discreetly to a neighbour, but one of the officers spots the exchange and immediately storms over. The man freezes like a frightened rabbit. The officer demands to know what he is holding. The man hesitates. His neighbour tries to intervene, insisting it is only a notice about next week's coal distribution. The officer snatches the paper, inspects it with dramatic suspicion, and finally thrusts it back with a grunt. The two neighbours hurry away, shaken. You slip past the patrol as they continue forward. Behind you, someone mutters that constables often choose this district for evening rounds, because they believe trouble lives here. Another voice counters that trouble sometimes follows the very men meant to prevent it. Those contrasting impressions match the conflicting interpretations modern analysts present when examining the relationship between police and the slum poor. No single explanation fits neatly. You sense that complexity as you listen to the way neighbours discuss the patrol's presence. Half irritation, half resignation. Up ahead, the officers stop again. This time they peer into a narrow gap between two buildings. A stray cat emerges, startled by the lantern light. The shorter officer waves his truncheon at it, muttering about pests. The cat leaps onto a ledge and disappears. From a window above, someone chuckles softly. The constable glares up at the window, but cannot tell who laughed. You move into a lane where several families have gathered outside their doors, hoping the open air might settle the stuffiness of their rooms. The moment the constables approach, the families stiffen. Children cling a little tighter to their parents. The officers ask whether anyone has seen a suspicious man carrying a sack. The parents exchange confused glances. A father shrugs and says, "Everyone here carries sacks." That answer does not amuse the officers. One writes something in his notebook with theatrical irritation. A woman carrying a basket of laundry crosses the path in front of you. She mutters that the constables always arrive after trouble never before. Another neighbour adds that when the slum truly needs help, when roofs fall or fights erupt, they appear as slowly as cold molasses. The two women share a look that speaks of long experience. A few steps later, you watch a constable stop a young man simply because he is walking quickly. The officer demands his name, his occupation, and the reason he is hurrying. The young man struggles to keep his voice steady as he explains. He is delivering bread to a family at the far end of the lane. The officer squints at him, weighing truth against suspicion. Finally, he gestures for the boy to continue, but follows him with narrowed eyes. The boy walks faster from the shadows. Several residents observe quietly. Their expressions are a mix of irritation and grim acceptance. They wait until the patrol has moved on before stepping out again. One older man pipes up that the officers never bother people in the wealthy districts this way. A younger neighbour replies that the wealthy districts complain loudly enough to keep the patrols polite. Their conversation drifts after you like a lingering scent. You follow closely behind as the officers confront a pair of men playing dice beside a stairwell. They kick the dice aside and instruct the men to disperse. The men comply, but not without audible grumbling. One mutters that the coins they wagered were barely enough to buy bread anyway. The constables pace back and forth for a few moments, puffing out their chests as though expecting applause for ending such a modest game. Eventually, the patrol reaches a dead end. The taller officer scribbles a few final notes. The shorter one adjusts the lantern. Without ceremony, they turn around and make their way toward the next street, their boots echoing along the stones. Their passing leaves the air noticeably lighter. As they disappear from view, life reawakens instantly. Doors open, conversations resume. Children sneak back into the street. Someone begins humming a tune, as if to brush away the lingering tension. You feel the neighbourhood inhale deeply, reclaiming its breath now that the weight of scrutiny is lifted. You stand for a moment, taking in the contrast. The slum does not fear the officers so much as it braces against them, like an animal flinching at a familiar threat. When you finally turn to follow the next winding path you carry with you, the echo of truncheons, lantern swings, whispered warnings, and the quiet resilience of people who have learned how to survive every sort of watchful gaze. You follow the path away from the officers until their lantern light fades behind a bend. The street ahead grows dimmer, quieter, wrapped in a softness that settles over everything as evening deepens. The slum at night is not silent, but its noise changes texture. Footsteps slow. Conversations drop into murmurs. Even the occasional shout seems dulled by the weight of exhaustion pressing gently onto people's shoulders. You feel that shift as you turn into a lane lined with narrow dwellings packed so tightly that their roofs almost touch. You step inside one of the buildings, drawn by the faint glow seeping through a crooked doorway. Inside the room is dim lit only by a small candle flickering inside a glass jar. The flame bends each time someone moves, casting unsteady shadows across the walls. Many observers from the period described how families relied on single candles at night, stretching wax as far as it would go. The room you stand in now breathes that truth. Quietly, its corners dark, its light frugal. A woman sits near the centre of the room, repairing a torn sock. Her movements are slow, deliberate, and methodical, the kind of pace people slip into. When the day's final strength has nearly run out, her husband lies on a straw mattress tucked against the wall, already half asleep. The child snores softly beside him, curled like a kitten clutching a scrap of cloth. The woman greets you with a nod, then keeps stitching the thread, whispering as it pulls through worn wool. Dampness clings to the air. You notice moisture glistening along the ceiling, where rainwater has seeped through cracks in the roof. She gestures upward and sigh. She says the roof has leaked for months, but no repairs are coming. An old superstition sometimes spoken here claims that water dripping in the night brings dreams that feel too real. Whether anyone believes that, or simply repeats it as a bit of sleepy folklore, the woman mentions it with a tired smile. She pushes a pot beneath the newest strip and returns to her sewing. Another resident passes through the doorway carrying a small lantern. He pauses to say the hallway is slippery tonight because the landlord never fixed the drainage. He mutters that someone nearly fell earlier. His tone suggests frustration more than fear. When you step with him into the hall, you see what he means. The floorboards are slick, reflecting faint candlelight in wavering patterns. You walk slowly, sensing the building's breathing wood, creaking distant voices rising and falling, the soft tap of water meeting worn boards. You reach the stairwell and grip the rail as you descend. The wood is smooth from decades of hands, though slightly sticky from humidity. At the bottom, you find a woman tending to a small stove. The heat radiates toward you in comforting waves. She stirs a pot of soup, so thin you can see the bottom through the broth. She tells you it is made from scraps gathered throughout the day, and she hopes it lasts until morning. She dips a ladle, tastes the soup, and nods with grim acceptance. If it keeps them warm, it is enough. A child nearer asks if there will be bread. She lifts her eyebrows and says, "Maybe tomorrow if the market prices drop." The child sighs, but nods, accustomed to uncertainty. The moment lingers between them like a quiet thread of tenderness. You feel it as you continue walking through the communal space. On the other side of the room, several neighbours have gathered around a candle stub. They share whispered stories about the noises they heard last night. Footsteps on the roof, a creak beside the window, a soft tapping near the chimney. One man insists it was just the wind. A woman says she swears she heard a voice through the wall. Their theories weave together into a gentle sort of evening ritual. Modern analyses of slum nightlife often present conflicting ideas about how much nighttime fear shaped these gatherings. Some claim such whispered circles provided comfort, while others argue they fed communal anxiety. Listening now, you sense both possibilities glowing faintly in their hushed tones. You step outside again. The night air is cool, sliding against your face like silk dipped in water. The alley is dim, illuminated by a single gas lamp whose flame sputters at irregular intervals. Several families sit on their steps, letting the last of the evening air ease the heat trapped inside their rooms. A man pulls his coat around him and says the slum always breathes differently at night. Slower, deeper, quieter. His wife nods, rocking a baby gently, while humming a tune that seems designed to soothe more than entertain. Across the alley, a teenage girl hangs damp laundry she did not finish earlier. The cloths sway slightly in the breeze. She says the damp night is better than letting tomorrow's sun beat them stiff. As she pins a shirt, she mentions that the lines sometimes snap under the weight of nighttime moisture. She chuckles and says once a line broke so suddenly that everyone thought a thief had leapt from the rooftop. The absurdity of the memory softens her tired expression. You keep moving. The alley dips slightly, and the boards beneath you give a tired groan. You pass a window where faint candle light spills through a thin curtain. A young man sits inside with his back toward you. He leans over an open book, tracing the words with his finger as though learning to read by the glow of the single flame. His concentration is so deep the world could vanish around him and he would not notice. People in poorer districts sometimes taught themselves to read at odd hours, according to accounts from charity school volunteers. The sight of the young man quietly fulfilling that truth touches something inside you. Further ahead, you find a small group gathered beside a doorway where warm air spills into the alley. Inside, an older woman tells stories to several children clustered at her feet. Her voice is soft and low, almost like chanting. She tells a tale about a travelling merchant who carried a lantern that always revealed hidden treasures. The children listen with wide eyes, forgetting the fatigue slouching over them. One boy leans his head against her knee. She gently brushes his hair aside without missing a single word in her story. He paused, absorbing the peaceful tone. Despite the dampness, the cracks, the flickering lights, and the exhaustion etched into every movement, a thread of calm runs through the slum tonight. Not comfort, not quite, but something quieter, endurance perhaps, or the quiet ache of people who have learnt to rest without ever fully relaxing. A distant window slams shut, startling a cluster of pigeons roosting on a ledge. They flap upward, wings whirring through the dark. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. The lamp head flickers again, its glow stretching and shrinking like a small heartbeat. You let out a slow breath. This nighttime world wraps around you gently, almost protectively. The day's noise has thinned. The slum's usual sharp edges have softened. Even the damp air carries a whisper of stillness, reminding you that exhaustion can become its own kind of lullaby. As you reach the end of the alley, you glance back. Candlelight trembles through cracked windows. Figures move slowly inside dim rooms. Voices murmur in drowsy patterns. The slum prepares itself for rest in a way that feels as ancient as the stones beneath your feet, and you too feel the pull of night settling into your bones, guiding you toward the long exhale, waiting just beyond the next turn. You slip into a quieter part of the slum, where the night has deepened into a bluish haze, softening the edges of everything it touches. The street narrows into a thin ribbon of broken cobblestones, and the silence here feels different from the calm you sensed earlier. It is thicker, more introspective, as though the neighbourhood itself has curled inward to nurse its private thoughts. As you walk, you sense the pull of dreams gathering behind shuttered windows, the kind born not from peace, but from longing. A soft glow spills from a window on your left. You pause, peering through the thin curtain that billows with each breath of wind. Inside, a family lies asleep in a huddled row, their bodies arranged like crescent moons along the floor. The father's hand rests protectively over the youngest child's back. A pot sits cooling on the hearth, and a small wooden toy lies abandoned near the door. Written records from reform societies often mentioned how families in crowded districts slept close together to save warmth and reassure one another against the strange noises that threaded through the night. Watching this family breathe in slow unison, you see that pattern reflected with haunting clarity. A few steps ahead, you glimpse another window where a woman sits awake beside a small candle. Her eyes drift upward in thought. She holds a scrap of fabric in her lap, though she is not mending. She simply folds and unfolds it absent. Mindedly, perhaps she is imagining a different life, or calculating tomorrow's tasks, or replaying a conversation that left her unsettled. The room behind her is plain and dim, yet her gaze has the faraway quality of someone travelling miles without ever leaving her seat. You continue forward, footsteps muffled by the uneven stones. The air cools further, stroking your cheeks like a chilled palm. You pass a doorway where a teenage boy leans against the frame, staring upward at the sliver of sky framed between sagging roofs. He tells you without looking down that he likes to count stars when the clouds part. He adds that some nights he pretends the brightest star is pointing the way to a life beyond the slum. His voice holds quiet determination, though he quickly shrugs, embarrassed by his own hope. Neighbours from decades past sometimes wrote in their memoirs about dreamers like him, young people who walked the alleys wishing for work education, or simply a bed that did not creak under the weight of strain. Their recollections echo faintly in the boy's unguarded confession. Farther along, a woman sits outside on her step-arms wrapped around her knees. Her hair spills across her shoulders like dark thread. She glances at you with cautious curiosity. She says she cannot sleep when the moon is bright, because it reminds her of the countryside she left years ago. She speaks about a stream she used to visit as a child, where the water glimmered exactly like the moon does now. She smiles softly at the memory. Then the smile slips away when a cold breeze runs its fingers through her hair. Her eyes fall back to her feet, as though the memory has already faded into mist. A faint creak sounds behind you. You turn to see an elderly man stepping gingerly out of his home. He leans heavily on a wooden stick polished smooth by years of wear. He tells you he likes to walk the alley once before bed, just to make sure he is still part of the world outside his room. His breath forms pale clouds in the air. He points toward the next building and mentions in a low voice that the tenant there claims to dream every night of the same street lamp flickering endlessly. The old man chuckles, adding that she is convinced the lamp is trying to speak to her, whether her claim was meant literally or playfully. Such odd stories often circulated among neighbours and were later preserved in oral recollections as glimpses of how nighttime imagination helped people cope with unrelenting hardship. You tuck the memory away like a small, shimmering pebble. You walk deeper into the lane until you reach a narrow crossway dappled with moonlight. Here the slum feels almost peaceful. The stones gleam faintly, the shadows stretch thin, and the sounds become gentle, the soft rustle of laundry on a line, the rhythmic breathing of someone asleep behind thin boards, the quiet tap of a loose shutter swinging lightly in the wind. You hear whispers from inside a cramped home. A mother is telling her children a final story before rest grips them fully. Her voice is soft, lyrical, carrying a tale about a fisherman who found a golden shell that granted him the power to dream entire worlds. The children sigh contentedly. You linger just long enough to catch the warmth in her tone before stepping away. A few houses down, you notice a man sitting with a notebook. The candle beside him sputters, threatening to go out. His handwriting is small and cramped. He explains that he tries to write down his dreams each night, so he will not lose them. He says some dreams feel richer than life itself. He admits with shy pride that he hopes one day to turn the dreams into stories. He laughs when he confesses that he cannot read his own handwriting in the morning, though you cannot know whether his ambitions will bloom or remain trapped within these cramped rooms. You feel drawn to the quiet dignity with which he tries to hold on to something of his own. You step into a darker section of the alley, where the buildings lean too close, blocking most of the moonlight. In this pocket of shadow, the silence feels deeper. A few slum elders believe darkness had uses beyond fear, claiming it helped the mind wander toward possibilities unreachable in daylight. Whether that belief formed as a coping mechanism or emerged from genuine conviction remains uncertain among those who later studied slum folklore. The thought drifts through your mind as you move gently through the hush. Suddenly, a burst of laughter startles you. A group of teenagers sit on the steps of a collapsing stairwell, telling jokes and daring each other to share awkward stories from the week. Every so often their laughter rises too loudly, and they quickly hush themselves, glancing toward nearby windows where babies sleep. One of them mentions a rumour that the slum's narrowest alley leads to a hidden courtyard where someone once posted anonymous notes filled with encouragement for passers-by. He says no one ever found who wrote them, though the notes appeared for months. You feel the charm of the tale. It is exactly the sort of gentle myth that neighbourhoods craft to give themselves hope. When the group disperses, the alley regains its fragile quiet. You walk on, letting the night smooth its fingers over you. In the next building, you see a young woman asleep at a table, her head resting beside a bowl she forgot to finish. A candle flickers near her arm, throwing golden light across her hair. Her exhaustion seems profound, as though weeks of labour have finally pressed her down. You gently close the warped shutters to shield her from the draught. At the end of the street, you find an older woman sitting upright in her doorway, her eyes half-lidded yet alert. She tells you calmly that she stays awake until her son returns from the night shift at the docks. She has done this for years, not because she expects danger, but because she wishes to greet him before sleep dims her senses. Her devotion settles over you like a warm, steady blanket. You finally reach the last bend of the lane. The slum grows still behind you. All its voices, all its longings, all its private hopes settle into one vast, quiet breath. You pause before moving forward, letting the night hold you gently. The dreams stored inside these walls, fragile, stubborn, yearning, cling to the air like faint threads of lantern smoke. You exhale slowly, absorbing the heaviness, the hopefulness, and the weary beauty woven into every sleeping room. Then you take one final step toward the heart of night, knowing the slum still has one more truth to reveal before dawn. You take a slow step into the broadest stretch of the slum you've seen so far, a space where several alleys meet like tributaries merging into a restless river. The night has settled fully now, spreading its velvet calm across rooftops and washing lines. But the slum itself has not gone to sleep. Instead, it hums softly, almost rhythmically, as though revealing its final deepest layer. You stand still for a moment, letting the mingled textures of sound, scent, and motion wrap around you. A faint glow rises from a nearby doorway. Inside, a man adjusts a small lamp and sets it carefully beside his wife, who lies curled on a narrow cot. She murmurs something in her sleep. He whispers back, even though she cannot hear him. His voice is warm, steady, full of quiet devotion. People who studied these districts long after they vanished often noted that despite the poverty, there was an unmistakable closeness that drew families together in ways wealthier homes sometimes lacked. Watching the scene now, you sense the truth in those old reflections shimmering at the surface of everyday life. You walk farther until you reach a corner where several neighbours sit on overturned crates, sharing warmth from a single kettle, resting on a few glowing coals. They invite you to join them with a subtle wave. You take a seat and feel the faint heat touch your palms. One man speaks about the day's troubles with a weary laugh. Another offers a few hopeful thoughts about tomorrow's prospects, and a woman tells a story about a gust of wind earlier that nearly carried her laundry halfway down the street. Their laughter merges gently with the rising steam. Someone mentions that yesterday a cat wandered into the courtyard with a piece of ribbon tied neatly around its tail. No one knows who tied it or why. Some residents insist it was a child playing a prank. Others claim it came from a celebration in a wealthier district, and the cat simply wandered home wearing a trophy. The tale lingers in the air, becoming the small and curious sliver of neighbourhood memory that brightens this gathering. You rise and continue wandering, letting the slum's final secrets reveal themselves as softly as dust falling from an attic beam. You pass a room where a woman sits quietly beside a loom, her fingers moving in slow, practiced motions that soothe her as much as the cloth she produces. She hums under her breath, creating a rhythm that calms the space around her. Observers who documented the daily labour of the poor sometimes remarked how repetitive tasks, even exhausting ones, created a kind of meditative refuge. Watching her now, you understand why those notes appeared so often. At the next building, you find a man leaning against a cracked wall smoking a small roll of tobacco he likely traded for earlier in the day. He lifts his chin in greeting and asks what you think of the slum. After wondering its length, you answer honestly that it holds more life than you ever expected. He nods knowingly. He says, "Most visitors assume the slum is only misery, But that is not the whole truth. He gestures toward the sleeping windows, the laughter that still drifts from a few open doorways, the distant scent of bread someone is baking from scraps. He says, "This place carries its own heartbeat. You feel that heartbeat thrumming beneath your feet. As you turn away, you hear footsteps behind you. A group of girls skips past their nightdresses, fluttering like pale moth wings. They chase one another in quiet whispers, trying not to wake their families. One girl pauses to tell you that she dreams of becoming a singer in a grand hall someday. Her friends giggle and nudge her forward, but she holds the dream firmly in her eyes. Reports written by early social workers often mentioned how children imagined bright futures long before circumstance narrowed their paths. The girl's shining expression reflects that enduring spark. Even now, the air grows colder as you move toward the last stretch of the slum. You feel a faint shiver pass through the buildings, as if the night itself wants to settle deeper into their bones. You reach a narrow platform made from an uneven collection of boards. The platform overlooks several roofs that slope toward the centre of the district. From here, the slum appears almost peaceful. Lanterns flicker in cosy clusters. Wisps of smoke rise from a few chimneys. A cat walks along a rooftop ridge with this quiet certainty of a creature that knows every hiding place. A woman joins you on the platform, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She tells you she comes here each night to clear her thoughts before sleep. She says the rooftops look softer from above, more forgiving. She does not pretend the slum is kind, but she believes it holds a strange kind of unity. When you ask her what kind, she smiles faintly. She says it is the kind that grows only in places where people rely on one another more than they rely on walls. Her words settle around you like a gentle blanket. You walk down from the platform and follow a thin alley that bends like a question. Voices drift from a window. Two brothers debating whether daylight tomorrow will bring new opportunities or the same old struggles. Their tones are hopeful yet practical. Another window reveals a woman arranging her children's shoes neatly by the door so morning chaos will unfold with slightly less confusion. A man repairs a stool at the end of the hall, humming a tune that rises and falls like a lullaby at the final bend. You come to a stop. The slum spreads behind you like a living tapestry patched together, stitched from countless small stories, worn in places vibrant in others. The night breathes steadily through it. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the hum of its presence. All the hardship, all the tenderness, all the fierce endurance woven into daily life. When you open your eyes, the slum seems to exhale softly, as though sharing its last secret, that even in the grimmest corners, life continues with surprising grace. People dream despite odds that would crush others. Families find comfort in each other's warmth. Children imagine grand futures. Neighbours craft tiny pockets of joy that sparkle like river stones in mud. And you, walking through this tapestry, feel the weight of those truths settling into your chest like a story meant to be carried. You take a final slow breath. The night pulls you gently onward. Now the slum quiets behind you and the streets grow softer with each step you take. Let the sounds fade. Let the warmth of distant lanterns settle gently in your mind. The night has stretched wide and deep, and you have walked through its heart, letting every whisper and flicker wrap around you. Now it is time to let the story dim, just as the candles in those narrow rooms begin to shrink to steady embers. Feel your breath slow. Feel your shoulders release the last bits of tension, as you imagine the rooftops dipping gently beneath the weight of moonlight. The slum's noise has thinned into a hush, and you can picture the families curled together, drifting into whatever dreams they can manage. Let your thoughts drift with them, softening at the edges, blurring into warmth and quiet. The air grows cooler, and even the cobblestones seem to smooth beneath your feet. If any leftover scraps of worry are still clinging to you, imagine them settling into the shadows, leaving your body lighter, calmer. The long walk through the alleys, the voices, the flickering lamps, the worn stairways, all begin to slip gently into the background until they become nothing more than a fading outline. Each breath grows slower, each thought floats a little farther away. The night folds itself softly around the slum and around you, holding everything still for a moment, as though the whole world has paused just long enough for you to feel safe, steady, and warm. Let your eyes grow heavy, let the dim glow of distant lamps melt into darkness. The story settles, the city settles, and you do too, sleep well, sleep deeply,